Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Andrew Michael Holness,
Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, Jamaicans at home, Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, Jamaicans at home and in the diaspora listening, watching and following on various media platforms, distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, Madam Speaker, honorable members, senators and former members seated in the well. I also join in welcoming the ministers of education from across the region that are here. They are in Jamaica for the CXC conference, but I guess they wanted to see what what all the excitement is about in the Jamaican Parliament. I welcome you not only as Prime Minister, but as a former Minister of Education. Madam Speaker, I stand before this honorable House with a heart full of profound gratitude and a profound resolve. And I consider it a singular privilege to do this for the 11th time as Prime Minister for a third consecutive term. I give thanks first and foremost to the Almighty God for His grace and mercy upon this nation through the passage of Hurricane Melissa, for sparing us the full measure of what that storm was capable of, and the strength He has placed in the hearts of our people. Farmers, parents, small business owners, first responders, who rose from the rubble with a dignity and a determination that humbled me. I thank Him equally for ordering my steps across 29 years of public service. As Member of Parliament for West Central St. Andrew, Minister of Education, Leader of Government Business, Prime Minister for a few months, still Prime Minister. Then the people's loyal leader of the opposition. And now Prime Minister once more. He has been my constant protection and compass. I thank the Jamaican people for the confidence they have reposed in me and my administration by re-electing us for a third term to form their government. I thank the many prayer warriors for their fervent intercessions, the well-thinking citizens for their private words of encouragement, and our party workers and activists for their vocal public support. I want to express my deepest appreciation to the international community that stood with Jamaica in our time of need. The heads of government and heads of state who called, who came, who committed resources, our multilateral development partners whose swift and decisive response produced the largest development financing package in Jamaica's history, and the many nations that sent personnel, supplies, and solidarity. Including members of the CARICOM family who are represented here by their respective ministers of education. To the men and women of the Jamaica Defense Force and the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Jamaica Fire Brigade, you walked in devastation on foot when that was the only option. Airlifted patients when roads had ceased to exist and distributed care packages to communities no one else could reach. You made every Jamaican proud, and this nation owes you a debt of gratitude. To every public servant who worked around the clock in the days and weeks following Melissa, you demonstrated public service at its finest. To the Jamaican private sector, the companies, associations, and entrepreneurs who mobilized resources, opened warehouses, contributed equipment, and served their communities without being asked, you show that Jamaica's resilience lives in the spirit of our people. To the entertainers and sportspersons, and to the countless individuals and organizations and members of the diaspora across the world who gave generously, Jamaica thanks you. Madam Speaker, I want to commend you for your disciplined and judicious ordering of the business of this Honorable House. You well know the impact of public service on families. And I want to thank my family for bearing the weight of public life with me and supporting my endeavors. To the people of West Central St. Andrew, my extended family for 29 years, you continue to trust in me. And that is the reason why I keep serving. This year, there are some major projects which we will complete and on which work will commence. In a few weeks, we will complete and hand over 2 new multifamily housing solutions under the new social housing program to replace 2 dilapidated tenements. And we will begin construction of 3 additional multifamily housing solutions, including 1 in the community of Bell Rock to replace houses destroyed by fire in 2024. We will continue the development of the St. Paul's Lane community with the construction of a Golden Age home and sporting facilities. Construction will begin on parks and sporting facilities for the people of Sibbons Park and the Mall Road communities. Rehabilitation and repair works are slated to begin in a few weeks for the Olympic Court housing scheme under the National Housing Scheme Rehabilitation Program. Shortly, we will open the Olympic Gardens Performing Arts Center and we will start the upgrade of the Kling Kling Oval. And I have good news for the people of Drewsland residing along the gully banks of the Sandy Gully. Repairs will begin on the collapsed sewer main and compromised retaining walls that pose a health and safety hazard to the residents. I'm certain the member from Western St. Andrew will also be pleased because it is a border area and we both share the challenge. Madam Speaker, these are but a few of the rolling stock of projects on the train line of delivery for the area. Every year we are making significant investment in the communities. Crime is down, business activity is up, the Olympic Way hip strip is vibrant. There is still significant work to be done. Nevertheless, the constituency is progressing and every year is better than the year before. I want to acknowledge the newly elected councillor, Kelvin Hall, and members of the constituency executive, Miss Lynn, Miss Veronica, Miss Finey, Miss Sadie, Miss Annette, all the people, all the stalwarts, too numerous to name. Madam Speaker, I also want to acknowledge the hard-working ministers of my cabinet, the dedicated members on both sides of this honorable house who serve Jamaica with distinction every day. I want to thank my personal staff and advisors, my communications team at OPM, and the dedicated members of my security detail. Madam Speaker, I want to especially acknowledge and thank the dedicated teams at the ministries that I lead. You know, Madam Speaker, I want to thank our Cabinet Secretary, the Honorable Audrey Sewell, and the team of the Cabinet Office. it is not well known that the Cabinet Office is actually a ministry, and the Cabinet Secretary is the permanent secretary. It is a ministry. I also want to acknowledge the support of Ministers Wheatley, Marks, and Fitzhenley, and our permanent secretary, Ambassador Rocky Mead, at the Office of the Prime Minister, another ministry of government. Madam Speaker, this administration has always been serious about security. We have recently delineated the Ministry of Defense with its own administrative standing, which is anchored by the permanent secretary in the OPM, Ambassador Rocky Mead, former Chief of Defense Staff. And we did this to yield greater cross-functionality with ODPEM. I want to commend Ministers Montague and Morgan and Permanent Secretary Arlene Williams, hardworking Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. Madam Speaker, I stand here as Prime Minister, and most people would understand my job to be directing and coordinating all of government through cabinet ministers. However, I also want to point out that I stand here as a Minister of Government as well, with direct oversight of several substantial portfolio responsibilities. I don't only direct, convene, and preside, I also do the heavy lifting of ministerial work as well. Over 4 ministries. Madam Speaker, the leader of the opposition only talks. I do the job of Prime Minister, and I head 4 other ministries. The leader of the opposition only talks. Many times nonsense. And takes home $27 million. In the last term, the leader of the opposition earned more than the Prime Minister. The opposition spokesman on finance stood in this house and said the opposition has no problem with the increase in MP salaries. A few days later, the PNP General Secretary put out a release saying they strongly object to the salary increase for cabinet ministers and members of parliament. Yet, Madam Speaker, none of them, with their self-righteous objection, declined to take their salary increase. None of them. In fact, Madam Speaker, they were the first ones calling the Parliament to find out the amount of their retroactive pay. I'll share this with you, Madam Speaker. A member on that side, not to be named, obviously concerned that the public posture of the PNP could force the government to reverse the pay increase, called to say that I should ignore the statement of the PNP General Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition, as all their MPs agreed with the increase and could not survive without it. You know yourself. Madam Speaker, when I took the decision to forego the pay increase, I said in a widely circulated press statement, this has broader implications for not only the current holder of the office of Prime Minister, but previous Prime Ministers or their surviving spouses, and possibly future Prime Ministers. It therefore must be considered very carefully. My current decision to forego any salary increase could easily be changed by another Prime Minister in the future, or a new mandate may give an opportunity to reconsider the Prime Minister's salary. On September 3rd, 2025, Leader of the Opposition, the people of Jamaica weighed all these matters in the political scale and gave my administration a new mandate based on the work we have done to earn their confidence. Madam Speaker, I have a gift here, if the standing orders would allow. I want to give it to the Leader of the Opposition. If you don't want it, that's fine. But I thought it would have been so appropriate. I thought this would be a good. By the way, Madam Speaker, this is a cap that is one of our local designers. It's a very popular cap, and I thought that the Leader of the Opposition would do well to have a cap like this. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the opposition spokesman on finance raised the issue of the rate of capital expenditure. He went on to suggest that the size of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development and its share of the national capital budget is a reason for slow utilization. Therefore, it should be deconstructed as a super ministry. The slow pace of utilization of the capital budget has nothing to do with the present configuration of the ministries. The cross-cutting issues of slow investment appraisal, permitting and approvals, procurement and contracting, coupled with a lack of efficient, well-resourced enterprise-scale contractors, is the cause of the low conversion of the capital budget into economic value, leading to greater levels of growth. In other words, we are an overly bureaucratic country with supply-side weaknesses which constrain our growth horizon. Despite these challenges, it must be noted that the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development, on average, has spent more than 97% of its capital allocation over the last 4 budgets. The opposition spokesman on finance would well be advised that in the 2022-2023 budget, the capital spend for the Ministry of Economic Growth and then job creation was 97.56%. In 2023-2024, it was 98.1%. In 2024-2025, it was 98.38%. And so far this year, haven't closed out as yet, we are at 95.59%. In fact, Madam Speaker, this ministry has stimulated, overseen, and supported the most sustained and robust period of infrastructure development since 1960, which in turn has resulted in the last decade being the most consistent and sustained period of quarterly growth in the last 30 years. I want to draw the attention of the House to the slide that is being displayed and to the viewing public. It's a very important slide. The economy under the Jamaica Labour Party returned 20 consecutive quarters of growth between the last quarter of 2015 and the COVID interruption. Before that, the longest quarterly stretch was 9 quarters. So there is a fundamental change in the Jamaican economy. The only time that we have not had growth would have been the COVID impact and the burial impact. The beauty of this graph that is being displayed, this table, is the speed at which the economy recovers. So, Madam Speaker, you know, there is something that we admit up front. This is not the growth rate that we would like to see. It's still very low. Nobody debates that. But, Madam Speaker, it is better than episodic growth. It is better than long periods of no growth. To get to growth, Madam Speaker, two things are necessary. They're not sufficient, but necessary. The first is to get to growth, Madam Speaker. The first is stability. And what you are seeing here as a feature of the Jamaican economy is stability. And the reason why we have this stability, it is because of the fiscal program that the government has implemented. You know, Madam Speaker, we go back and forth debating who is the father of fiscal discipline. We already said the DNA test proved that they are not the fathers of fiscal discipline. But, Madam Speaker, there is one more child of this government for which the paternity is not in question. And it is necessary for growth. And that is resilience. Madam Speaker, the author of Jamaica's resilient economic performance is this administration. The economy, as I said, Madam Speaker, gave us 20 consecutive quarters of growth between the last quarter of 2015 and the COVID interruption, and without doubt the best performance in employment generation in the history of independent Jamaica, with a most recent 3.3% unemployment rate. Again, Madam Speaker, no other government has been able to bring down unemployment to the levels that we have. We now have practically full employment, first time ever in the history of Jamaica. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, now Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development, is doing what it was set up to do. It is a well-performing ministry. Madam Speaker, the world order as we know it has changed. I know the present state of world affairs is troubling to most Jamaicans. Uncertainty, disruption, and seeming unfairness appears to characterize the new order. Our historic colonial experiences create an almost instinctive reflex that we will be victims in a world where raw power appears to be dismantling the protection of a rules-based system, where engagement is highly transactional and opportunistic. In the minds of the average Jamaican, they may not say it in this way, but if you were to distill the thoughts, the question is, how are we going to navigate this space as a small country and do more than just survive, but thrive? It is a real issue when we see happening almost regularly now, wars in distant places, weaponization of sanctions. It is a concern to the average Jamaican when the price of their goods rise, having nothing to do with them. As a small country, the sense of feeling powerless is real. But as Jamaicans, as Caribbean people, we don't just cower and say we are helpless. Our history tells us we must resist as a people. It is who we are, even in the face of power, unequal and uneven. We must resist. I think the first strategy, however, Madam Speaker, is that we must learn from our past. It is not the first time that the global order has changed in profound ways. We could go back to the Napoleonic era, but we won't go that far. Let's go to the post-World War II era, 1945 to 1950, when the actual multilateral system that exists now was formed. Born out of the ashes of global conflict, it is the most decisive and extensive ordering of global affairs in modern history. The United States of America and the Allied powers constructed a global order anchored on the formation of the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which we now call the WTO. This multilateral order drastically reduced interstate conflict and enabled unprecedented economic growth over the last 80 years. It is not perfect, but it is better than anything that existed before. Madam Speaker, while multilateral rules-based institutions were being established, two other developments were happening in parallel. Many other developments were happening, but I want to focus on just two. The first is the emergence of what is called a bipolar power structure, which we generally call, at the time when it was emerging, the Cold War. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Between 1947 and 1991, the world split into two completing blocs, the US-led Western Bloc and the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc, each with its own military alliances, economic systems, and ideological frameworks. The second process, Madam Speaker, was the process of decolonization. And this was accelerating. Empires could no longer afford their colonies. Resistance against colonialism internally increased moving dozens of states to independence across the world. Asia in the 1940s through to the 1950s. Africa in the 1950s through to the 1970s. And the Caribbean in the 1960s through to the 1980s. The United Nations started in 1945 with 51 countries. Today, it has 193 countries. Newly independent states joining this new rules-based multilateral system essentially created a third bloc. And you would hear these terms being used, I certainly heard it when I was growing up, referring to this third bloc as the third world. So the new system of global order, when it emerged with two blocks, the Western bloc, the Eastern bloc, divided by a Cold War, a process of decolonization which gave states independence, creating a third bloc. Madam Speaker, the multilateral system afforded newly independent nations like Jamaica a voice and a vote. That was very important in the multilateral system. A voice and a vote. But, Madam Speaker, we had no power. We had no military power. And we had no economic power. Madam Speaker, both superpowers sought to control this third bloc, to expand their spheres of influence, secure strategic geographies, access resources and markets, and spread their culture and ideology, or simply put, to exercise hegemony. This was the context within which Jamaica started its navigation of a complex global system at its independence. At the outset, the Right Excellent Sir Alexander Bustamante, when asked about Jamaica's alignment, declared, "We are with the West." A simple yet profound framing of Jamaica's foreign policy, economic and social program, and political direction. The Jamaica Labour Party has always taken a pragmatic yet principled approach to the multilateral system and the vicissitudes of the poles of powers within it, while staunchly maintaining our independence of thought and agency to act in our best interest. The position served Jamaica well. The period between 1962 and 1972 saw political stability, the fastest pace of growth and development of the Jamaican economy, and the build-out of our institutions. Madam Speaker, the period 1972 to 1980 of the Cold War era, the PNP government under Prime Minister Michael Manley changed Jamaica's political, economic, and social development policy and trajectory to democratic socialism, which also informed a change in Jamaica's foreign policy outlook. During that period, Jamaica joined the non-aligned movement and pursued relations with other socialist and communist countries of the Eastern Bloc, including Cuba. This was a fundamental and consequential shift based on an almost fanciful ideological aspiration. It placed us in the crossfire of a power struggle between superpowers which was not in our interest and had negative consequences domestically. This period coincided with the collapse of the Jamaican economy, our first debt crisis, the hollowing out of the middle class, and the emergence of widespread political and gang violence. Many of the challenges we face today are anchored in that period of our history. Now, look, I know what I have said here is going to stir up our antsness, because people do feel very strongly about this period, but I don't think it is ventilated enough. Look, no, what I've said here is not opinion. These are the facts. These are the facts. If you ask me for my opinion, I will give you my opinion. Right? And my opinion is that I admire Michael Manley's intellect. I admire his willingness to challenge, but I also question his judgment. Madam Speaker, as it turned out, by 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed as a pole of power, and the multilateral system entered a unipolar phase dominated by the US, Western liberal globalization, and free markets. The global socialist experiment for which the PNP diverted Jamaica had been defeated and proven to be the wrong path to be pursued. Now, here are the facts. Michael Manley, and this is part of why I admire him as well, would come back to power a reformed man in 1989, abandoning the policy of democratic socialism, embracing the IMF, liberalization, privatization, free markets, and pursuing closer ties with the United States. And this is the part of the history that is not reconciled. Why did we go down that path?
In the first place. Should not have gone down that path. Only to go to the White House.
That is the question that keeps bothering me. Because it must bother every Jamaican, because had we not diverted for 10 years, even if we had changed government, but kept strategic and wise policies, Jamaica would be far better. Far better. As we have seen with countries like Singapore, facing the same challenges, but maintained a strategic and wise foreign policy.
As a capitalist, 18 years as a capitalist.
Madam Speaker, today we see the global system changing again, moving from a unipolar world to now a multipolar world, with the rise of China, India, the reassertion of Russia, and the EU. There are now more players who can exercise military, economic, technological, and normative power within the multilateral system than when it was designed 80 years ago. This means there is likely to be greater contestation within the multilateral system and less automatic consensus on issues and solutions. There is also a greater likelihood of fragmentation, which is what we are seeing now, as powers seek to advance their interests unilaterally. It begs for a reform urgent reform actually, of the global multilateral system. We cannot abandon it, but it must be reformed to take into consideration these new power dynamics that have emerged. In this dynamic foreign policy environment, Jamaica must be strategic. We cannot go down the road of ideological rhetoric. Been there, done that. Foreign policy is about having a clear framework of principles and values within which we pursue our interests, while treating with the interests and powers of others with whom we engage. My administration has always ensured that our foreign policy serves our economic interests. Whatever I do must make sure that Jamaica can recover quickly, that the person in Westmoreland whose house has not yet been restored, that the chances of a quick restoration is not hampered. And we see the benefits of our foreign policy efforts in the swift mobilization of relief and access to over $6 billion of reconstruction funds from the multilateral financial system. I don't want anybody to talk about foreign policy, because there's no other era in which Jamaica's foreign policy has delivered economic benefits for the people of Jamaica. A strong multilateral system is in Jamaica's interest, and we will always do our part to ensure it works. The essence of agency is that you act on your own will. As a responsible member of the global community, Jamaica will always take the necessary action to be compliant with all our obligations under the multilateral system. Nobody has to put sanction on us or force us, because we have agency. The country would have seen this in our actions when our actions caused us to be removed from the FATF and the AML-CTF grey list in 2024. Grey list, the way our structure and system was, it was reviewed. We ended up on the grey list. Every member of the government worked very hard, including members of the opposition, to pass the necessary legislation, make the necessary policy changes. I mean, there were those saying that these, imperialists imposing global financial things on us, make we resist it. And what? Lose access to the international banking system? That's the logic of the argument. Yes, there are things we must resist when it comes to our values. There are things that define us as Jamaicans that we're not going to change on those. Man is a man, woman is a woman. We're not going to change on that. So we do. But we look at the things that are also in our economic interest. All right. So, Madam Speaker, similarly, when concerns were raised with the government of Jamaica by the United States regarding the Cuban medical mission more than a year ago, I want you to pay attention to that. More than a year ago, we reviewed the program against our laws and the various multilateral conventions under which we have obligations. And let me say from the outset that the Cuban medical mission has been beneficial to the people of Jamaica. The Cuban doctors and nurses have assimilated quite well in our hospital system and have developed strong bonds with the people they serve. I can say that Jamaicans love them and want them to stay. However, there were some aspects of the program which were brought to the attention of the Cuban counterparts, our Cuban counterparts, to include how personnel were paid, that run counter to our own laws and several international conventions. We were hopeful that adjustments could be made to the program to make it compliant and that we could have reached some agreement where we could continue to have the direct services of the Cuban health professionals who are here. We continue to be hopeful that some agreement, arrangement, some changes can be made to the program. We continue to be. However, Madam Speaker, I want it to be noted and always acknowledged in the debate that every year since I have been Prime Minister and before, in this House, we have debated motions on the embargo on Cuba. Yes, my administration did that. Carrying on the position of the PNP administration and the JLP administration before and the PNP administration before. So this notion about abandoning friends, and look here, man, keep that in the 70s. We are in a different era now. At all my speeches to the UN General Assembly, there are a few lines in there about Cuba and the embargo. When I spoke at CARICOM, I spoke fairly and frankly. As our closest neighbor, we are concerned for the situation in Cuba. Through CARICOM, Jamaica will do its part to offer support for our brothers and sisters in Cuba. We take note of press reports that talks have opened between Cuba and the United States. This is a moment for reform and reset, and we are hopeful for a positive outcome. In all of what is being said and insinuated, there's one question that must be answered. What would the PNP have done?
Absolutely. Nothing different. Absolutely. You couldn't say that.
Well, we won't know. We won't know. Madam Speaker, there are moments in the life of a nation that test not only our systems but our soul. Hurricane Melissa was one such moment. The slide that is about to be displayed shows the path Hurricane Melissa took across the island. Hurricanes are becoming more frequent and more intense. And I want the country, members of parliament, the guests here to internalize what I'm about to say. In the 65 years since 1960, the Atlantic has produced 799 recorded storms in the last 65 years. Remarkably, 201 of them, or a quarter, occurred in the last decade. of the 34 Category 5 hurricanes recorded since 1960, 14, or roughly 38% of them, have occurred since 2015. If that is not showing you that the climate is changing. Meteorologists describe Melissa as the strongest tropical cyclone the Earth is physically capable of producing, a storm at the limits of nature's fury. When the winds finally settled and the rain relented, what greeted us in western parishes was not merely damage, it was devastation of a kind that defies description. Madam Speaker, I have seen photographs of Hiroshima, the haunting, flattened silence after the atomic bomb fell in August 1945. A city reduced in a single moment to ash. When I traveled through St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland in the days after Melissa, I understood viscerally what that kind of erasure looks like. And yet, Jamaica did not fall. We were tested at the very limits of nature's power, and we did not break. Our economy held, our institutions functioned, and our people adapted. In those same parishes, even as debris still lay heavy across the land, I met farmers already planning their next planting. I met mothers clearing the rubble with their bare hands so their children could have somewhere to sleep. I met small business owners who had lost everything but were ready to start again. In those moments, I felt something that no storm on earth can touch: the quiet, indestructible resolve of a people who have never, not once in our history, chosen to surrender. Madam Speaker, before anything else, we acknowledge with gratitude, humility, and reverence that God's hand was upon this island, and that we were spared the full measure of what Hurricane Melissa could have done. But alongside grace, Proverbs 22, verse 3 tells us that a prudent man foresees danger and takes precaution. Jamaica took precautions, not only in the hours before landfall, but in the years before the storm. Madam Speaker, when Melissa was still days away, shelters were activated, evacuation orders were issued, and emergency communications tested. The public was kept informed of the trajectory of the hurricane and precautionary measures to be taken through several public briefings and media announcements. We were as ready as this country has ever been for a hurricane. The investment this government has made in our security forces over the past decade, expanding personnel, equipment, and technology, growing our helicopter fleet, which turned out to be a very wise investment, strengthening our offshore patrol vessels, deepening our engineering and logistics capacity, paid dividends in those critical hours and days after Melissa struck. The seamless interface between national coordination and operational capacity was one of the defining institutional achievements of the Melissa response. It is a model we will build on, strengthen, and sustain. Madam Speaker, we would not be doing justice to the response if we did not also acknowledge what the experience exposed. Melissa stretched our systems, logistics chains were strained, fuel and maintenance capacity came under pressure, maritime and air assets ordinarily deployed to border security and surveillance had to be diverted to humanitarian relief, creating windows of reduced coverage, which we cannot afford to ignore. These are not failures, they are lessons, and we are acting on them. In recognition of the strategic importance of disaster management to national security, the government transferred the disaster preparedness and emergency management portfolio to the Office of the Prime Minister. This was not a bureaucratic organization, it was a declaration of national priority, positioning disaster resilience at the apex of the government's strategic agenda and creating the structural proximity between ODPEM, the JDF, and the effective civil-military cooperation that is needed to adequately respond to a disaster of this nature. As we strengthen ODPEM, We are not seeking to contain within its walls every capability Jamaica needs to manage disasters. ODPEM's effectiveness going forward will rest on the quality of its coordination with the full ecosystem of national capability, drawing on the entities with experience in digital infrastructure, cybersecurity resilience, geospatial data mapping, and spatial analytics. Madam Speaker, I want to point out that in the weeks immediately following Hurricane Melissa, something extraordinary happened. A moment when countries would have faced downgrades, economic uncertainty, and capital flight. All three major international credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, reaffirmed Jamaica's sovereign standing with stable outlook. And Moody's went even further. They upgraded us. Now, can you imagine? After a hurricane, the rating agency said, well, you know, even with the hurricane, you have done so well. I'm going to maintain your outlook. Yeah. I just want everyone to stop and reflect on that for a moment. It sent a powerful signal to the world that Jamaica's resilience, note the word now, not stability, Jamaica's resilience, which is what we have put into the economy, is not only social and emotional, meaning our people's ability to withstand disaster, but it is also institutional in the agencies that we have created in terms of fiscal and economic. That credibility wasn't gifted to us. It was earned through years of discipline, courageous reform, and sound governance. And it has now become an asset we are deploying in the service of every Jamaican. And the results are already visible. The recovery from Hurricane Melissa is proceeding faster than anyone initially projected. But speed of recovery does not happen by accident. It is a product of fiscal strength deliberately built and strategically deployed. Consider what that means in practice. Within weeks, the government extended a loan of $150 million to the Jamaica Public Service Company to support the immediate restoration of electricity across the island. That single intervention accelerated the reconnection of communities, businesses, hospitals, and the resumption of daily rhythm of life that so many Jamaicans depend on. Today, electricity and water have been restored to approximately 99% of customers. Madam Speaker, let us be clear about what that made possible. A government that had maintained fiscal discipline, reduced its debt burden, built buffers and reserves, and earned the confidence of the international markets, wrote the check. The loan to JPS was the difference between the family sitting in the dark for 6 months and getting back electricity in 3 weeks. It's the difference between a farmer losing an entire season and getting back to work. It's the difference between despair and dignity. Our recovery has been unprecedented in its speed. Agricultural output has rebounded more quickly than anticipated. Inflation has come in below projections, enabling the Bank of Jamaica to reduce its policy interest rate to 5.5% in February 2026 and revise its projection for full economic recovery down to 3 to 2 years from the earlier 3 to 4 years that was projected. Madam Speaker, we have proven our resilience. Now is the time to claim another feature of an economy: resurgence. So you move from chaos to no growth to stability to resilience, and now, Madam Speaker, today this budget is the first declaration that Jamaica will resurge. What is the difference between resilience and resurgence? Resilience is defensive. It is a capacity to absorb a blow and remain standing. Resurgence is forward-leaning. It is the decision to move with purpose, with ambition, with a vision of something greater than what existed before. We will not simply patch what is broken. We will build forward stronger, smarter, and more equitably than before. The suffering of our Western parishes will not be a footnote in our national story. It will be the catalyst for our next great chapter. For Jamaica, adversity has been a full stop. It has always, well, Madam Speaker, let me read that properly. For Jamaica, adversity has never been a full stop. Has never been a full stop. It has always been just a comma, a brief pause before we rise again. We have endured, now we will build together. Madam Speaker, this government is leveraging our national resilience and international confidence in order to translate it into a platform for accelerated national development. Through close engagement with our multilateral partners, including the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, CAF, and the Caribbean Development Bank, Jamaica secured US $6.7 billion in terms of a financial package within weeks of the hurricane. This is the largest and fastest mobilization of development financing in Jamaica's history, and it was made possible not by the hurricane, but by everything Jamaica had built before it. Madam Speaker, the discipline of yesterday is funding the resurgence of tomorrow. But financing alone is not enough. We must, as a country, confront an uncomfortable reality. While Jamaica has built one of the most credible macroeconomic frameworks in the developing world, the execution of large investment projects too often moves at a pace that belongs in another era. Layers of approvals, fragmented processes, and rigid procurement rules, though designed with good intention, can make it difficult to move quickly when transformational opportunities arise. In today's global economy, capital is highly mobile, and investors compare jurisdictions not only on stability and incentives, but on speed of decision-making and certainty of execution. Too often, promising opportunities have gone elsewhere, to countries that are simply more nimble. We cannot allow this to continue. Even recently, Madam Speaker, I have seen projects that were eyeing Jamaica. Investors got frustrated and have gone elsewhere. We are advancing two powerful and complementary reforms. One focused on how we build infrastructure and the other on how we attract and accelerate transformational private investments. NARA will have special powers, that is the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, will have special powers to accelerate development approvals as well as procurement, enabling the execution of resilient infrastructure projects at a scale and speed this country has never seen before. NARA is not only about project delivery, it is about project networking to create new economies in areas impacted by the disaster and to introduce the greatest expansion of our economy in the shortest period of time in our history. Madam Speaker, NARA will turn a crisis into an opportunity for Jamaica. One of the most important lessons of Jamaica's economic reform journey was that execution requires not only institutional capacity, but credible, independent oversight. The Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC, became internationally recognized as a model of transparent, civil society-led accountability that gave Jamaicans and international partners confidence that the fiscal program was being implemented as agreed. We will use a similar model for NARA called JAMROC, that is Jamaica Reconstruction and Resilience Oversight Committee. And I'm pleased to announce that JAMROC will be chaired by Professor Peter Blair Henry, a son of Jamaica, who is currently a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He is a vice chair of the National Bureau of Economic Research. And I hear somebody say an academic, but listen to this part of it. A member of the boards of Citigroup and Nike, who has risen to the very pinnacle of international economics and public policy, and who brings back to this country a lifetime of intellectual and practical achievements and a personal commitment to Jamaica's development that has never wavered. The search for NARA's chief executive officer is also well advanced. Following an open advertisement, both locally and internationally, 5 candidates have been shortlisted, and we are going through the interview and evaluation process. Madam Speaker, a complementary reform to NARA addresses the investment attraction problem. We will introduce a new framework called FAST Jamaica, the Facilitated Acceleration of Strategic Transformation. This will be part of our national growth inducement strategy through investment. FAST Jamaica will establish a dedicated pathway to fast-track strategic priority investment projects critical to Jamaica's economic transformation, particularly those with an investment value of US $150 million or more that can commence implementation within a year and could be integrated into the NARA network of projects. The framework will focus on projects in sectors that will shape Jamaica's competitiveness, and we're looking at areas such as energy infrastructure, digital infrastructure and telecommunications, logistics, air and seaports, water, sewage and desalination, low-income housing and urban development, high-value tourism including wellness, medical and sports tourism, entertainment and the creative industries, STEM education and research, specialized healthcare, high-value agriculture and agro-processing, advanced manufacturing, and critical minerals, including rare earth elements. Cabinet will retain the ability to designate additional sectors where strategic opportunities arise. Central to FAST Jamaica will be a strategic investment council, a high-level body tasked with the initial screening and evaluation of major investment proposals. The elements of this already exist between JAMPRO, DBJ, and the Cabinet Office. The Council will assess the strategic merit, economic impact, and national interest considerations of each proposed project and will recommend to Cabinet the most appropriate development modality, whether public-private partnership, joint venture, concession arrangements, or otherwise, as well as whether the project should proceed through direct negotiation or a competitive process. Projects approved by Cabinet will be designated strategic investment projects and will benefit from accelerated approvals across government, coordinated regulatory engagement, and dedicated facilitation teams to ensure efficient execution. FAST Jamaica will also allow the government, where appropriate, to engage with unsolicited proposals from investors, recognizing that some of the most transformative projects originate from private sector proprietary knowledge. Madam Speaker, Fast Jamaica is not about weakening safeguards. It is about modernizing how government partners with strategic investors in a fast-moving global economy. Fiscal exposure will continue to be rigorously addressed by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Cabinet will retain full oversight of all final agreements, but what will change is the speed, coordination, and clarity with which Jamaica engages with major investment opportunities. Together, these reforms represent a fundamental shift in Jamaica's execution architecture. They answer the question that has haunted this nation for too long. Why does so much promise take so long to become a reality? We have accomplished a lot, but we could have accomplished so much more. So, Madam Speaker, NARA is established. We will have the legislation. I will table the legislation today. We have interviewed 5 shortlisted persons to become the Chief Executive Officer. We will make a determination shortly. We have selected someone to head the oversight body, and we will have conversations with members of civil society, the opposition, and other interest groups to fill out that body. So NARA is established. The purpose of NARA is to take all the projects that we have had in development, or some of them in File 13, and all the new projects, and coordinate their implementation. It will work directly with the projects that the government is leading. But that is not going to be enough. We need to crowd in the private sector, and that is why we have FAST working in complement with NARA. And a typical way in which this will work, Madam Speaker, when I go to show you all the projects that NARA will likely do, you will see that there are great opportunities for the private sector to come in. Every highway that we put in opens up lands for housing, low-income housing, for tourism, for agriculture, for manufacturing. Madam Speaker, NARA's first and most consequential mandate will be to prepare a comprehensive project and economic plan to deliver within the next 4 years. And when we say deliver, we mean complete within the next 4 years. Today, I lay out a transformative vision for Jamaica by highlighting several national projects across the length and breadth of the country. Many of these projects are not new. They have appeared in development plans, consultancy report, policy discussions for years, in some cases for decades. This vision was never the problem. What was missing was the mechanism to convert them from aspirations into reality. The financing, the institutional architecture, and the enabling environment. We now have all of these. Some of these projects will be delivered through NARA, others will be executed through existing institutions and public-private partnerships operating alongside and in concert with NARA. What unites them all is a single coherent national vision. A Jamaica rebuilt stronger, planned smarter, connected more efficiently, and distributed more equitably. Where every region of this island is a functioning engine of growth, and where the resurgence we are claiming is visible, tangible, and felt in the daily lives of every Jamaican. I will highlight a few of these projects starting in the southwest. Black River. Madam Speaker, I want to start in Black River, because Black River tells a story that is larger than one town. It is the story of the existential vulnerability of low-lying coastal communities to the intensifying force of climate change. Black River is one of Jamaica's oldest and most storied towns. Founded in the 18th century, it was among the first places on this island to receive electricity, piped water, and the motor car, a proud maritime hub, the commercial heart of St. Elizabeth, gateway for the logwood and rum and pimento trade that shaped our economic history. The Georgian wooden houses along the waterfront, the masonry, mercantile buildings, the civic structures by the sea, all spoke to a town of character, history, and dignity. But Black River grew as many Caribbean coastal towns grew, parallel to the shoreline. Its hospital, its courthouse, its market, its homes, all concentrated along the coast, all exposed. For generations, that vulnerability was managed, tolerated, absorbed, but Hurricane Melissa ended that. Storm surges of 8 to 14 feet tore along the Crane Road corridor. The historic waterfront was devastated, civic buildings destroyed, critical infrastructure severely compromised. Madam Speaker, we will not rebuild Black River as it was. We will rebuild it as it should be. And in so doing, create something this town has never possessed in its 300 years of history: a real planned, consolidated urban core. The Urban Development Corporation, working with our development partners, is advancing a climate-resilient redevelopment plan that separates what belongs inland from what belongs on the coast. The heart of the plan is the new urban center, to be developed inland, safely above storm surge and projected sea level rise. And you can see a representation of where that urban center is going to be and what it, well, that's the waterfront, but what it could look like. So, this is where Black River's essential public functions, its hospital, courthouses, municipal offices, police station, tax office, schools, market, and transport hub will be consolidated into a planned, workable, flood-safe precinct for the first time. It will have a proper town square, a civic park. The buildings will be designed to withstand Category 5 wind loads. Built on elevated platforms above projected sea level rise scenarios with utility corridors, drainage infrastructure, and emergency redundancy. The historic waterfront will be protected by a layer of coastal defense systems, submerged offshore breakwaters to dissipate wave energy before it reaches shore, a concrete seawall integrated with a continuous public boardwalk, and engineered revetments along the most vulnerable stretches of coastline. The waterfront will become what it always had the potential to be: a vibrant public amenity, an entertainment and tourism corridor, a place where boutique hotels and restaurants and cultural experiences make this stretch of Jamaica South Coast a genuine destination. So, the same questions that Melissa forced on Black River must now be confronted everywhere, and the answers must be guided by the same logic, applied consistently, deliberately, and at national scale. That logic can be distilled into 4 foundational principles that will guide how we plan, build, and invest going forward. The first principle is strategic spatial planning and risk-informed development. What happened in Black River happened because for decades, development decisions were made without regard to hazard mapping, flood risk, or climate projections. That must now change. Critical national infrastructure must progressively be relocated away from high-risk coastal zones, Hospitals, schools, utilities, highways, and logistic facilities must be positioned with full regard to storm surge, flooding, and sea level rise. Where we build is as important as what we build. The second principle is building redundancy in distributed systems across critical infrastructure. Black River Civic Core was concentrated in one exposed corridor. And when Melissa struck, a single surge compromised everything simultaneously. That is not resilience, that is fragility. Our transportation corridor, power systems, water supply, telecommunications, network and logistic systems must be engineered with backup capacity and distributed architecture so that when one part of the system is struck, the rest keeps functioning. Resilience is incompatible with single points of failure. The third principle is the integration of regional development and resilient economic clusters. The Black River Plan does not end at the town's boundary. It connects to housing developments, agricultural corridors, tourism infrastructure, and the regional road network across the South Coast. That is intentional. Resilience cannot be built by project. It has to be built by a network. Connectivity, roads, hospitals, schools, housing, energy systems, and government services must be planned together to create a self-sustaining regional ecosystem. The fourth principle is economic diversification and production resilience. A resilient nation is not only physically strong, it is economically adaptable. Black River's rebuilt waterfront will anchor not just tourism, but wellness, marine recreation, heritage experience, and culinary offerings rooted in St. Elizabeth's agricultural identity. That diversification away from dependence on a single sector, any single market, any single source of economic activity is the model for Jamaica as a whole. We must broaden our productive base. Madam Speaker, the redevelopment of Black River will embody all four principles. It will be proof of concept that Jamaica has learned lessons and that we are determined to apply them not just to the historic town of the South Coast, that is the Black River, but to every parish, every corridor, and every community of this island that faces the same challenge as we seek to build forward stronger. Now, Madam Speaker, I know the people of Black River are anxious. Your MP, I could only describe it as anxiety. He's also anxious. Particularly persons who own property in proximity to the coast that sustained damage. There's a certain level of uncertainty. They're not sure whether or not they should rebuild, restart. Many of them have reached out to say, Prime Minister, I don't want to restart. In fact, there are several who have said, I was even contemplating coming out of business. Melissa's hastened the decision, but they want some indication so that they can figure out how to plan. And we hear on our side the magnitude and scale of what we are planning to do can't be rushed. We can't make wrong decisions. So we have to think these things out carefully, put in place the systems and the structure. So today I would have laid out for you the NARA, which will manage it, the legal framework under which it is going to be managed. So we are well there. So I would say to the people of Black River, we have identified suitable lands to support a structured program of relocation and reconstruction for housing and business. For businesses, the town of Black River, the UDC has been asked to begin dialogue with property owners regarding acquisition of property and relocation where necessary. Madam Speaker, I don't want to say too much here because I know how, what leaves here and lands there might be two different things. So I prefer that the entity, I have tasked them to go and start the dialogue, that they go and speak to the people directly. After agreement is reached, then you can speak publicly. Early next month, various agencies of the government will begin the consultations and sensitization with specific communities in Black River and along that corridor regarding relocation of their communities. The truth is there are just some communities that proximity to the swamp, threat from the sea, when we look at all of the risk maps that the best option is to relocate. But we know how difficult this is. And so we will handle this in a very sensitive way. We will ensure in a very transparent way as well. We will ensure that nobody is at a loss and that livelihoods are enhanced as a result of it. It is not something that is going to happen overnight. We acknowledge this, but it is something that we must do. So we will start the conversations individually with them. Madam Speaker, as you can see, there are several exciting transformational projects planned for the southwestern region, including Fonthill. Yes, with its world-class ecotourism potential, Fonthill is down for development. The airport in Little London, which was already announced, that will be brought on to the NARA project sheet. And the new urban center in Negril, that as well will be brought on to the NARA sheet. And I wanted to just draw your attention to the road network. There, the lines in red are showing you new highways and corridors that will be built. One of them will be the extension of the east-west highway from the Williamsfield leg bypassing Spur Tree. And then there is another corridor which will not run on the coast but more inland, but will connect to where the new Black River Urban Center will be. So all of these roads will be under NARA, and they will be started and completed within the next 4 years. In fact, these roads should be completed within the next 3 years. What we learned from the hurricane is that in the immediate few days, we did not have access. The roads were impassable, they were blocked. And, one of the problems was just how the road was built. We had no challenges with the highways. No highway was blocked because these roads were built to different standards, different drainage provisions were made. Now, St. Elizabeth, which didn't have it before, will now have 2 modern highways traversing the parish. Madam Speaker, I now turn to the northwest end of the island. Relax, the man. No, but the member, just to put the member at ease. What I'm presenting here are large-scale reconstruction projects for Westmoreland. You would have heard what we're going to do with Negril and so forth. But for the other areas, it is mostly housing reconstruction. So I will address that. I will address that under a different modality. So, Madam Speaker, anyone who has driven from Montego Bay to Negril knows the bottlenecks at Hopewell and Lucy. This is not just a quality of life frustration, it is an economic cost. Every hour of unnecessary journey time is a deterrent to tourism investment, a disincentive to the visitor's experience, and a brake on the development of Hanover's enormous untapped potential. Madam Speaker, Hanover has so much potential, but it is, almost like an hinterland in Jamaica. And in the same way that we have opened up St. Thomas, we will open up Hanover for development. The government will advance the Hopewell and Lucy bypass, running through a connection point on the Long Hill bypass, which is already under construction, in St. James, traversing westward with Link Road serving both Hopewell and Lucy before terminating on the westward side of Lucy. The alignment will run approximately 3 kilometers south of the existing coastal road. This will unlock the entire waterfront stretch between Montego Bay and Negril as prime resort lands. In addition to the bypass, we intend to develop the Lucy Harbour into a premium boating destination. Sheltered from the prevailing winds, with deep natural water and proximity to emerging resorts on that belt between Montego Bay and Negril, Lucy Harbour has every natural attribute required to become a premium boating destination. So under NARA, this is something that we will do to create the economic incentive, but this is a perfect project for private sector. And so NARA will stimulate, facilitate, coordinate, but more than that, get it done quickly. The town of Lucy itself is similarly at risk for storm and wave action. In other words, it faces the same threats as Black River. In fact, probably worse, because Lucy is actually below sea level. So I wish to indicate here that consideration is being given to the eventual construction of a new town centre for Lucy when the bypass that we have spoken about is complete. So we won't do it in this round. We can't take on too much. But let's do the bypass first, and then we do the new urban centre for Lucy. Madam Speaker, I want to talk about St. James, Montego Bay in particular. Recently, I was written to by one of the tourism interests in Montego Bay, expressing real concern about the state of the town, how it looks, the collection of garbage, the public facilities that are there, and there is a real concern raised, and I want the tourism community to know that the government hears your cry. We are not just sensitive to it, we are working to have it addressed. One of the big issues which I know is a challenge is the collection of municipal waste, the collection of garbage. And I'm sure Minister Mackenzie will address this at some point, but you recall when we said we have over 500,000 truckloads of debris to move. We have made a dent on it, but it has been at the expense of the diversion of the limited stock of equipment that we have from the municipal operations into the debris management operations. I think very shortly we will have to bring the debris management to either a pause or an end so that we can refocus on the municipal issues. So I want to indicate to the people of St. James, yes, we hear you, and we are going to address this problem in short order. Madam Speaker, Montego Bay is our tourism capital, and it is time we undertook new investments to revitalize and secure its position as the leading destination in the Caribbean. Hurricane Melissa inflicted severe damage across Montego Bay, particularly in the coastal communities of Catherine Hall and West Green and Freeport. Destruction was painful, but it has given us something valuable, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine this corridor in a way that is bolder and more resilient. But we must first protect this city, which is a key pillar of Jamaica's economy. Montego Bay has long been vulnerable to flooding. Its rivers, when overwhelmed, have repeatedly brought misery to communities. The government will therefore undertake significant investments in river training to contain, manage, and direct floodwaters away from communities and commercial areas and critical infrastructure. The people of West Green and Catherine Hall will be very happy to hear this. And downtown Montego Bay, yes. Madam Speaker, the Montego Bay Freeport and its surrounding areas represent one of the most strategically valuable and scenically spectacular stretches of real estate in the entire Caribbean. It is home to our mixed-use cargo and cruise ship port and the Montego Bay Free Zone, and is flanked by major hotels, premium residential developments, and a forthcoming 28-story mixed-use hotel and residential complex, a powerful signal of the confidence that investors already place in this corridor. At the same time, the soon-to-be completed Montego Bay Perimeter Road is fundamentally reshaping the economic geography of the wider region, opening new corridors and unlocking additional lands for investment that were previously out of reach. Our plan is to gradually relocate the BPO and light industrial activities in the Free Zone to new purpose-built facilities along the Montego Bay Perimeter Road, catalyzing vibrant economic activity along the emerging corridor while providing modern, world-class, purpose-designed spaces. The thinking and the beauty of this strategy is that this will free up prime waterfront lands on the Freeport Peninsula for their highest and best use. We envision a landmark mixed-use development, commercial, retail, and premium residential seamlessly woven into the urban fabric of the city. Absolutely. Comparable in ambition and elegance to the celebrated Brickell waterfront in Miami. And at the heart of this vision will be a performing arts theater. It always is a puzzle to me. Every hotel has to have their own entertainment package. You know, we could invest in developing real premium entertainment if we had a proper performing arts center. You know, we could even invite Broadway to come and have plays there that the tourists could, instead of having to be stuck in the all-inclusives, they have somewhere to go. Locals can have somewhere to go. So the thinking, and you know, one thing with this government, we apply strategic thinking to everything. Everything. So, you know, when the Freeport was developed along the coast, very important that it was actually coastal, so that because it's close to the port as well, because the idea was like manufacturing, you get on a ship and you go. But things have kind of changed a little bit, because most of the work that the Free Zone is doing has nothing to do with shipping. We ship it via email. In other words, the Freeport is now doing digital services, BPOs. They don't need to occupy valuable premium port lands. So where they need to be is actually beside efficient public transportation. Absolutely. So people can get to work easily. Right now it's chaos to get into the Freeport. Yeah. So just this move is going to increase the efficiency of the town, but increase the value and productivity. and redirect traffic from outside of the town to allow Montego Bay to be able to breathe. Madam Speaker, the vision does not stop at Freeport. What we are proposing is the transformation of the entire coastal corridor, from the Freeport sweeping eastward to Harmony Beach Park, along the waterfront, and all the way to the iconic Hip Strip. This breathtaking stretch of Caribbean coastline will be unified into one seamless, world-class leisure, entertainment, and shopping corridor. The top road. Minister, what's the proper name of the top road? The Queen's Drive.
Top road is
The president of Montego Bay. Top road, as we all know it. Very, very few people know it as Queen's Drive. The top road will be dualized. And it's a very important point. The top road will be dualized to handle traffic efficiently, while the bottom road will be progressively pedestrianized as well as the Hip Strip itself. The result will be a walkable waterfront of rare beauty and vitality, connecting the cruise ship port to all the way to Harmony Beach Park and Doctor's Cave Beach, and every restaurant, bar, gallery, and shop along the Hip Strip. It's always a disappointment, you know. We have a all-inclusive culture. We call it the all-inclusive. But really, if you think about it, it's really all-exclusive. Right? If it were truly all-inclusive, you would come to your hotel and you would be able to walk outside, you know, go on the strip, go to the market, sit down in a restaurant. You would be able to move around the city. And that's what we when we talk about transforming tourism, that's what we really have to do. Right? We have to do that. So we're going to use the opportunity of Hurricane Melissa to just deal with these matters once and for all. NARA will deal with them once and for all. Madam Speaker, we are also examining ways to enhance the elegant corridor between Sangster International Airport and the Montego Bay Convention Center. Yes. You know, it's called the elegant corridor. I must tell you, it still has some elegance to it, but it needs a refresh. Yes, it needs a refresh. So we're going to be examining ways to do that. One of the big challenges with the elegant corridor, the Minister of Tourism will tell you, and I'm saying this for the hearing of those persons who operate hotels along the corridor, is the noise pollution. Yes. You see, Madam Speaker, when the North Coast Highway was being developed, that section was technically supposed to be a boulevard. Right? So, you know, in designing cities and towns, you know, streets lead on to boulevards. So streets empty traffic onto boulevards, and boulevards carry them onto highways. But what has happened is that this road is neither a boulevard or street, or it is playing all these roles. And it is carrying heavy traffic like a highway, but people have to exit to go into the hotels or go into the business places. Worst of all, and what really sometimes I'm very distressed when I see it, the hop, skip, and jump of workers trying to move across the road to get to the hotel. It doesn't make sense. So that entire elegant corridor has to be redefined and re-engineered to deal with soundproofing by building natural sound barriers, grade separation and tunneling so that you can move across, and building, because there is enough space in several areas to also build a kind of local road that connects all the hotels. Then you go under or over and you're onto golf course or wherever, to really make the tourism product more seamless and of greater value and greater attractiveness. Madam Speaker, Black River, Madam Speaker, like Black River, Falmouth is a case study in the existential vulnerability of low-lying coastal communities to the intensifying impacts of climate change. The flooding of the town, the failure of its drainage infrastructure, and the severing of its road connections during Hurricane Melissa were not random misfortunes. They were the predictable consequences of a town whose layout, institutions, and infrastructure were simply never designed for the climate realities we face today. We cannot simply rebuild what was there. We must fundamentally reorganize Falmouth. I see, Madam Speaker, a big smile on the Member of Parliament for North Trelawney, who, unlike most MPs, she actually lives in her constituency and lives in the town of Falmouth. All right, member from Southwest St. Catherine. The drag line, who else lives in their constituency? Good. Good, Rose, good. The drag line, which is the critical drainage canal running east to west through the town, provides a natural organizing boundary. It is both the town's most important piece of infrastructure, and as Melissa demonstrated, it is the most neglected. Major infrastructure works will be undertaken to clean it and progressively modernize it into a functional water feature that both protects the town and enhances the remarkable Georgian character. Again, this will be a project on an hour. But more than that, the drag line will serve as a boundary between two distinct and complementary zones of reimagined Falmouth. North of the drag line, closer to the sea, the focus will be on what the waterfront does best: tourism, heritage, recreation, and coastal protection. The magnificent Georgian Historic Core, the Albert George Market, the Falmouth Courthouse, the Tharp House Complex, the churches, and the Baptist Manse will all be preserved as far as possible. The cruise port and the waterfront will be enhanced and activated as world-class visitor experience. South of the drag line, we will build the resilient civic backbone that Falmouth has never had. The hospital will be relocated inland. It's a very important point, members. Madam Member of Parliament, we will be relocating the Falmouth Hospital inland. We have identified somewhere. We'll make that known as soon as we have finalized the land. And this will be away from the flood zone with direct access to the North Coast Highway so that it remains fully operational precisely when it is needed most. Madam Speaker, during the pandemic, I flew to the hospital, and again, I want to commend all the hospital workers, but I wanted to commend the Falmouth workers in particular as I visited them. Very difficult circumstances, but like everywhere else, they were there doing their service. A new urban center will be built to modern standards of climate resilience and will consolidate critical public services and give people of Trelawney the standard of public facilities they deserve. Further south, and I want Minister Grange to pay attention to this one. Further south, anchored by the Trelawney Multipurpose Stadium at Florence Hall, we will finally deliver on the promise this facility has always held. We will be developing the area into a world-class sports center for sports training, major events, and sports tourism. While building around it vibrant housing and a commercial nucleus that brings permanent economic life to this corridor. Madam Speaker, we have had several proposals come to use the Trelawney Stadium. But the government was never fully in a position because, Madam Speaker, to convert this into a sports tourism entity would require not just the facility. We would have to put in place infrastructure, water, proximity to working and resilient health facilities, proper housing, all the things that would be required to make such a facility work. So we were never in a position then to do it. But today, Madam Speaker, we are bringing all the infrastructure. We are bringing all the infrastructure together. So this can actually now become a center of economic activity in sports. The Minister of Tourism sent me a note to say that I forgot to mention the upgrade of the Montego Bay Convention Center. Yes, under these projects, the Montego Bay Convention Center will be upgraded in addition to the re-engineering of the Elegant Corridor. Madam Speaker, I now move to the northeastern section of the island. Madam Speaker, the North Coast Corridor and the Draxall and Miami Bay stretch in particular has become one of the most rapidly developing commercial zones in Jamaica. New businesses, new housing developments, new hospitality enterprises, and new entrepreneurial energy have concentrated in this corridor with remarkable momentum. The government wants to support and deepen that energy, not for it to be strangled by the congestion, but for it to be able to properly carry the traffic load of the area. On major event weekends, traffic snarl from miles from St. Anne into neighboring Trelawney. The North Coast Highway capacity has been exceeded by the very growth it helped generate. And attempting to upgrade a heavily used roadway while traffic is still flowing through it, as we learned from the South Coast Highway Improvement Project, causes disruption and dislocation that simply cannot be absorbed by communities and businesses that depend on the corridor for their livelihoods. The solution is to build the alternative first. Detailed feasibility studies are being completed for the North-South Highway Extension Project. The proposed extension consists of two segments branching from a new grade-separated interchange near Miami Bay, westward to Discovery Bay in St. Anne, and eastward to Tower Isle in St. Mary. Together, these extensions will create a high-speed tolled alternative to the existing North Coast Road, diverting through traffic away from the congested commercial corridor, reducing journey times dramatically and unlocking the tourism and investment potential of the wider North Coast and St. Mary to the western parishes. Once the North-South Highway extension is sufficiently advanced, the North Coast Highway Improvement Project will follow, upgrading the existing alignment from Montego Bay to Draxall, including the dualization of key sections where traffic volumes and safety demands require it. The Draxall corridor is not a problem to be managed. It is a success story to be expanded. With this investment, we give it the infrastructure it deserves, and we unlock the next chapter of growth along Jamaica's most visited coastline. Madam Speaker, I now turn to the eastern end of the island, Port Antonio. Port Antonio is unlike anywhere else in Jamaica. It is the birthplace of Caribbean tourism. The town that first showed the world what Jamaica could be, drawing Hollywood legends, royalty, and the world's most discerning travelers to its twin harbors and extraordinary natural setting. It deserves a future worthy of that legacy. As I have reported to this Honourable House on previous occasions, the Port Authority of Jamaica, working with international consultants, town residents, elected officials, and government agencies, developed a master plan for Port Antonio built around a clear and compelling vision. A high-value, low-density tourism destination that preserves the unique history and character of this irreplaceable town while unlocking its enormous unrealized potential. We are now moving from planning to delivery, starting with the Port Antonio bypass. Madam Speaker, sometimes, I'm doing this now 11 times and going through all the projects and the plans. I can just imagine that the people listening might say, but you said this already, or here goes another plan. But the beautiful thing is that having seen these plans from conception to inception, it is just an amazing feeling. So I recall when we were doing the discussions about how are we going to develop this beautiful asset of Port Antonio. And we recall that when the sewer lines were being put in, I believe by the opposition at the time was the government, the chaos it created in the town.
We got the money.
Well, yes, we got the money, but they implemented. Right. So, but it was chaos in the town, just to put in the sewer lines. And so the thought was, if we can't do any further development in the town, because the development itself may kill the town. So what we have to do first is to do the bypass. We have to create an alternative so that traffic can flow whilst we do, because of the significant development. So we announced the project, and Madam Speaker, and I'm now pleased to say that the project man is man, woman is woman. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that this project has started. This is an $81 million project, and it is an essential precondition for everything else the master plan will seek to achieve. This 18-kilometer corridor will be delivered in two phases. The first spanning Norwich to Turtle Crawl Harbour, and then 7 kilometers of 4-lane roadway, new bridges and upgraded drainage, built inland and elevated to protect against storm surges and coastal erosion. By diverting through traffic away from the historic town centre, the bypass will give Port Antonio the space it needs to become the premium destination the master plan envisions. Beyond relieving congestion, the bypass will open new corridors for housing, commerce, and economic activity. And as I've said, works has already begun. The broader master plan will deliver 4 transformational elements: a new cruise terminal in the East Harbour, paired with high-end hotels and villas on the Folly Lands, which will establish Port Antonio as a premium cruise destination unlike any other in the region, intimate, authentic, and famed by some of the most spectacular scenery in the Caribbean. The cricket grounds will be enhanced into a modern multipurpose sports and entertainment amphitheatre, activating this underutilized asset and bringing major events to Portland for the first time. A new pedestrian promenade along the shoreline will connect the east and west harbors, transforming the waterfront into a continuous walkable space for residents and visitors alike. And a new public park will give the people of Portland a world-class recreational amenity on their doorsteps. Madam Speaker, just to be clear, these pictures that you are seeing are not just, promotional rendering. Actual architectural design work has gone into this. All right. Complementing all of this, Madam Speaker, is the Boundbrook Urban Center. So you hear me talk about we're going to build a urban center. We are building urban centers. The Boundbrook Urban Center is approximately 40% complete. Like the Morant Bay Urban Center, Boundbrook will be an integrated commercial hub combining public and private services seamlessly in one location. Madam Speaker, the development of the new port, and I want this is the Morant Bay Urban Center. Well, the bypass starts there, so it connects there. So, Madam Speaker, the development of a new port in St. Thomas has been discussed for some time. The original intent was to develop an aggregate port to serve the growing demand for construction materials in regional markets such as Guyana and Suriname. However, Hurricane Melissa fundamentally expanded our thinking. Hurricane Melissa served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of Jamaica's southern coastal line and the existential threat that a direct strike on Kingston would pose to the port of Kingston, and by extension to the nation's ability to recover from any such disaster. As a result, the government will now not only develop an aggregate port for export, but one with capacity for mixed usage, such as the Reynolds Pier in St. Anne. This port will serve as a critical backup to the port of Kingston in the event of a major disaster, while simultaneously driving economic growth and creating much-needed employment opportunities for the people of St. Thomas. Subject to more detailed feasibility studies, the Port Authority has identified a site near Yala, St. Thomas, that benefits from adequate coastal depth and vessel berthing, proximity to established quarry operations, and road access via the newly completed highway. Madam Speaker, the Port of Kingston is now one of the fastest growing ports in the entire hemisphere, and we are determined to ensure that our infrastructure keeps pace with that growth. We are undertaking a series of transformational projects that together will create the largest concentration of near-port logistic lands anywhere in the Caribbean. The first of these is the $80 million Westland projects already underway, which will add 15 acres to the Kingston Freeport Terminal, increasing cargo storage capacity by more than 25%. The second involves the realignment of the Marcus Garvey Drive to the northeast of Tinson-Pen and the incorporation of the Tinson-Pen lands into an expanded near-port corridor. No, it's our constituency. A portion of these lands is already being actively utilized for automobile logistics, a clear signal of Kingston's emergence as a regional hub in a dynamic sector and a preview of the far greater potential that lies ahead. Madam Speaker, inadequate drainage infrastructure along this corridor has resulted in disruption of operations from even moderate rainfall. The National Works Agency, in collaboration with local and international consultants, has completed comprehensive studies for a drainage system designed to efficiently convey stormwater to Hunts Bay. We will move decisively under NARA to finalize the designs and implement this solution. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, we can't expand the port without doing this drainage project. Madam Speaker, speaking of drainage, the Kingston metropolitan area is urgently in need of serious work on its most critical drainage infrastructure. That is the Sandy Gully, which is the city's main defense against flooding. This was built some, 70 years ago? Almost 60 years ago? More than 60 years ago. So, and it really has not had a major overhaul. And just to explain to the country how that drain works and why we need the drain. If there is a weather system that is coming off the Kingston Harbor and it is going across Kingston, it is going to meet the hills of St. Andrew. And what that will do as the precipitation moves against the hills is that all of that will fall as rain. It will come down the hill, and if it doesn't get into the sandy gully and go into the sea, it will flood the Kingston Plain. And so that's why it was built like that. So it actually takes the water coming off the hills for any heavy precipitation. But the gully as it is, because the inverts and the other infrastructure that support it, they are aged. And so they are falling apart. So on the Nara, yes, thankfully, the gully was not damaged. The sandy gully was not damaged by Melissa. But because we have a resilience mandate, we know that this is a key piece of infrastructure that is needed for Jamaica's resilience, and therefore the reconstruction of the sandy gully will be a major project on the Nara. Anchoring the entire logistics ecosystem is the Cape Manners Special Economic Zone, Jamaica's flagship logistics project. The Cape Manners Special Economic Zone is designed to complete Jamaica's transition from a transshipment hub to a fully fledged logistics center for the region and beyond. The first phase will be developed over 4 years at a cost of $8 billion, covering 200 acres of the 700-acre property, generating hundreds of direct and indirect jobs during construction alone. Taken together, the Westland, Tinson Pen, and the Cape Manners Special Economic Zone project, which has started. These three investments will assemble the largest block of near-port logistic lands in the region, placing Jamaica firmly on the pathway for fulfilling our national ambition of becoming the fourth global node in logistics alongside Singapore, Dubai, and Rotterdam. Madam Speaker, these are the exact words that were said by the former Minister of Industry and Commerce, who is now the Member of Parliament for Western St. Andrew, which shows that, and he knows, I've always, where credit is due, give credit. You don't have to originate all the ideas, right? The brain is not all in one head. And how I see myself, yes, I like to think myself as a great thinker and conceptualizer, but I prefer to be thought of as the great builder, the one who does it. Madam Speaker, when major disaster strikes, the ability of the state to function, to coordinate, to communicate, to make decisions, to serve the people depends on having facilities that can withstand the impact and continue operating in its aftermath. Hurricane Melissa exposed the vulnerability of the government itself. Jamaica currently houses its ministries and departments and agencies in a patchwork of aging, scattered buildings, many of them structurally inadequate, poorly connected to each other, and wholly unprepared for the demands that a major disaster places on government operations. Madam Speaker, the government will advance the development of the government campus at National Hero Circle as a national priority. The vision brings together Jamaica's Houses of Parliament, key ministries and agencies into a single purpose-built campus. In the post-Melissa context, the government campus is more than a statement of national pride. It is a strategic investment in the continuity of government. Madam Speaker, this Parliament could never have withstood Hurricane Melissa, or even a slightly lower hurricane. And I think it is now a moot point, Mr. Speaker. I think every member of Parliament here serving in this building would have to agree. The building has served us well, put it that way. But it really cannot carry us much further. Madam Speaker, resilience is not only our road and bridges. Resilience must also include our health facilities. Kingston Public Hospital has a historic and venerated as it is, has stood for over 300 years. 300 years. It is vulnerable, and had Hurricane Melissa struck Kingston, the consequences could have been more catastrophic, potentially damaging or destroying a major national referral hospital at the very moment when the residents of the surrounding area would need it the most. That would have added a dangerous new layer of public health crisis to an already severe natural disaster. We have to take note of our vulnerabilities and address them before they manifest. It is imperative that a new Kingston Public Hospital be built to modern international standards with resilience, continuity of care and disaster preparedness at its core. I am pleased to note that the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority will lead its construction, and Cabinet has already given approval for the acquisition of lands to facilitate the new facility. Madam Speaker, both our major international airports sit adjacent to the sea, and we are vulnerable to storm surges and the long-term effects of sea level rise. When Melissa struck, the operational pressure on both facilities was immense. The question that we must answer honestly and urgently: what happens if one or both of our major international airports is rendered inoperable by a natural disaster? The answer cannot be that Jamaica has no answer. Vernon Field has been discussed as a development opportunity for decades. The vision of an aerotropolis, an airport city that would anchor Jamaica's ambition to become the world's fourth logistics hub has appeared in strategic documents. I've spoken about it numerous times. Cabinet decisions and development plans have been made since the 2000s. The long-term vision still remains our aspiration. Former Minister Mike Henry, I'm certain that if he is listening, would be happy to hear that the Vernon Field, and that's the airstrip you're looking at, which was built during the World War II era, that by and large the concrete is still intact. It has over 2,000 acres of land around it. A premium piece of real estate is used for drag racing, when that piece of real estate should be our strategic backup, and where we make strategic investment to eventually make it into a full-blown airport. And this is why we will advance the Vernon Field Light project, a focused phase rehabilitation of the existing airstrip to create an international airdrome capable of accommodating the largest commercial aircraft in operation. And this means that in the event of a hurricane, earthquake, or other disaster that renders Norman Manley or Sangster International Airport inoperable, or both, Jamaica will have an inland facility capable of receiving wide-body jets, humanitarian relief aircraft, cargo planes, and military transport. The continuity of our aviation connectivity, which is the lifeline of our ecotourism, of our tourism economy, and our import supply chain, cannot depend entirely on 2 coastal strips of land exposed to the sea. Beyond its resilience function, the Vernon Field Light project will deliver immediate operational value across a range of activities, for example, providing dedicated facilities for international private jets, purpose-built hangar facilities, aviation training and certification, as well as serving as the Maritime Air and Cyber Command base for the JDF. Madam Speaker, the slide now being displayed shows the National Highway Network, including all planned highway projects. What it illustrates is a vision that is within our grasp. A continuous, modern highway network encircling the entire island, connecting every parish, every port, every airport, and every major economic center into a single, seamless system. The objectives of this network are: 1, to reduce travel times and transportation costs for businesses and families, to open new corridors for agriculture, industrial, and tourism development, and to strengthen resilience by ensuring that no community is ever again isolated because of a disaster, and of course, to create new lands for low-income housing. Hurricane Melissa has, among other things, reinforced that infrastructure cannot continue to be planned, designed, and built in silos. That approach has cost us dearly. Roads are rehabilitated and then torn up again because a pipeline issue was not anticipated. Drainage deficiencies short the life of otherwise sound roadworks. Slope instability undermines the investments made without adequate assessment of the surrounding terrain. This fragmented reactive model is inefficient, expensive, and wholly inconsistent with the scale and ambition of our national reconstruction vision. We are therefore moving decisively towards integrated infrastructure planning, a framework in which roads, drainage, water, sewage, utility corridors, slope stability, and climate risk are considered together from the design stage and sequenced into a disciplined way through implementation. Integration planning must be matched by stronger infrastructure governance. Part of what involves a long overdue, that is part of the work which involves a long overdue reform of how we classify and manage the national road network. At present, roads of vastly different purposes, economic significance, and strategic importance are treated in broadly the same way. A modern road designation framework will allow us to distinguish clearly between local access roads, parish connectors, strategic economic corridors, tourism routes, agricultural links, and emergency and evacuation corridors. Madam Speaker, what this will do is to inform the budget. Right now, how are roads repaired? All right, so the government, through a process like this, will identify strategically important roads. And those roads are usually networked. And all of these roads that are built centrally, they stand up. And they carry quite a bit of volume and maintain our connectivity. But a large part of the road repair and maintenance budget is politically driven. MPs feel, and I feel the same way, that I must have influence over the road construction and repair budget. So in other words, road repairs are also influenced by political pressure. Now, maybe that's not a bad model, but what it does is it helps to fragment how the limited road repair budget is spent. So what happens is that the road repair budget is broken down essentially by constituency and by the effective lobbying of members of parliament. Now, the truth is that That strategy may have served well. But what it creates is a great deal of fragmentation, because every year we spend billions of dollars. But if you look at the road network, you can't really say that you have developed a road network. And at some point, as a country, we have to say, look, we need to make impact with the money that we are spending. And so that is what the One Road Authority is being designed to do. I know there is concern that the One Road Authority is going to take away autonomy from parish councils. No leader of the opposition, that's not what it is being designed to do. So one of the things that we're doing is to do a proper accounting for the roads, so we know how many roads we actually have, how many miles of roads. Then we go through a process of a proper categorization of roads. Then we look at the roads in terms of their strategic value. Are they connecting roads? Do they carry critical manufacturing? Are they critical for evacuation? All kinds. So we look at these things, and then we develop a proper maintenance plan. The first phase of that proper maintenance plan is the SPARK program. Already, the SPARK program is supposed to do over 600 roads. You've gone about 120 roads have been done across the island. I am sure that almost all MPs who were here from the last term can say that there is a road being done in their constituency, a road or two. But aside from developing a kind of structured budget for the maintenance of roads, Madam Speaker, we must develop standards for how the roads are maintained. And there must be an entity that holds road users to account when they destroy the road.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, it is a great pain to me to drive on some of our very important urban roads, arterial roads, and you see the wanton spillage of concrete. And it's as if they do it with impunity. Well, I am putting all of those persons who are spilling concrete on our roads on notice. When the NARA is established, you will be prosecuted. The One Road Authority. You're listening. The One Road Authority. Because that entity will also have the power to prosecute.
Yes. And something too.
Madam Speaker, I want to turn very quickly to housing. This year, the National Housing Trust marks its 50th anniversary. The NHT has stood as one of the most enduring and consequential institutions in Jamaica's development architecture, a testament to the vision of former Prime Minister Michael Mann. Hail the man. As I said, he did some good things, but we should also note, because the member from St. Andrew Southwest, Southeast, saying, well, if you're going to talk about history, you must talk about it completely. You must give the full story. Right. So the full story of the NHT is that, of course, the idea to create the NHT was that of Michael Manley. But the NHT was, as you would know, of course I was. No, but history is not for the people who live it, it's for the people who read it. So, no, if you read it, you have to read history. You have to read history. Because, the truth is, leader of the opposition, there are people who live the experience, right? But when they actually read it, they say, but it's different. Because when you have to sit down and put everything into context and bring things into consideration that the person experiencing it would not be able to interpret, you get a fuller experience when you're reading the analytic of the event. But Madam Speaker, the point is that the NHD was formed out of the NIS. Yes. In other words, the fund that we created, the National Insurance Fund, which when we created, the PMP objected to it, turned it around, called it sin, never wanted it to be done. So now what happened is that, of course, the initial establishment of its structure and the funding came from the NIS. So, I mean, it's just a part of the context of the NHD. But to the credit of former Prime Minister Michael Manley, this is an institution that has served Jamaica well. Madam Speaker, when Hurricane Melissa struck, the NHD did not wait. It moved quickly, decisively, and with compassion that the scale of the crisis demanded. Approximately 30,000 mortgages across 7 of the hardest hit parishes received an automatic 6-month mortgage moratorium, providing immediate relief for mortgagors whose homes remain uninhabitable. That moratorium has been extended. That moratorium, the NHC has extended it until the beneficiary is able to restore their home. A special disaster relief grant of up to $500,000 was made available for contributors for contributors who demonstrated a need, prioritizing those unable to take on additional borrowing, including pensioners and other vulnerable groups. Over 5,500 applications have been received under the grant facility alone, with nearly 1,800 already processed and close to $1 billion dispersed. The NHT has also procured 2,500 semi-permanent housing solutions at a cost of US $19 million for families who lost their homes entirely. The first 300 units are on island and are being cleared for distribution. So finally, we will have some of these modular housing solutions, semi-permanent housing solutions. The NHT also introduced a hurricane relief loan of up to $3.5 million at concessional 2% interest rate to support essential repairs, disaster resilience upgrading, including reinforced roofing, and hurricane shelter and supplementation of insurance claims. Madam Speaker, the leader of the opposition said he hasn't seen any program insisting that restoration must be done to code and standard. I can assure you, Madam Speaker, that this program under the NHT, that the persons who are restoring their homes must do so according to the relevant local building codes. I am pleased to announce that the program will be extended through to March 2027, ensuring that families across the island can access concessional financing to rebuild, not just the standard that existed before, but to an even higher standard of resilience. So this loan program will be extended to next year, March. Madam Speaker, let me give the House and Jamaica a clear picture of where the NHT housing delivery stands. As at the 31st of January 2026, the NHT is actively managing a housing train line of over 41,000 solutions at various stages of development across the island. This includes approximately 10,700 units currently under construction, and you see them, those are telling you where they are all across Jamaica. Nearly 6,000 at contract award stage, and 11,500 in procurement and negotiations, and more than 11,600 in planning and design. 2 major new developments have commenced at the Longville Meadows in Clarendon and Friendship Phase 2 in St. Elizabeth, together totaling 2,800 solutions. In the coming financial year, the NHT has projected housing expenditure of approximately $50 billion, with a further subsidy of approximately $21 billion under the External Financing Mortgage Program. This represents one of the most ambitious housing programs in the history of the NHT, covering developments in St. Catherine, Trelawney, Manchester, Clarendon, Westmoreland, St. Thomas, St. Mary, Kingston, and beyond. Madam Speaker, I need to directly address the public debate surrounding the annual transfer from the NHT to support the budget. The opposition has made much of the annual $11.4 billion transfer from the NHT. In the face of fiscal pressures created by Hurricane Melissa, the government had no realistic alternative but to extend the drawdown. Were the drawdown to be discontinued, the $11.4 billion would have to be found elsewhere, resulting in additional taxes beyond those announced. I fully acknowledge that the Jamaican workers contribute to the NHT with the expectation that those funds will be used for housing. That expectation is legitimate, and the government takes it seriously. But we have to be clear on what the real challenges are and how to solve them. First, let me give some deeper insight into the $11.4 billion. $11.4 billion is the gross amount that the NHT transfers to the government. Gross. This is net off against the statutory deductions and taxes that the NHT itself is obliged to pay to the government. Technically, therefore, the government gets approximately $7 to $7.5 billion net from the NHT. I think that is a very important contextual element of the problem. No, every year. Every year. Every year. So, because sometimes we run with the headlines, but we don't really look at the details. All right. Second, the NHT remains a solid, well-capitalized body that is not a fiscal risk to the government. The NHT has not in any way been impaired in its ability to satisfy demand for mortgage loans, even at 0% interest rates. To further improve the cash flow under the External Financing Mortgage Program, NHT contributors can access their NHT mortgage through approved partner institutions instead of going through the NHT itself. The NHT's portion of the loan attracts its usual NHT interest rate, even though the loan is processed externally. Furthermore, there has been no issue, very important point, Madam Speaker, there has been no issue of misuse or mismanagement of any NHT fund under my administration, like the Outameni scandal under the PNP. Talk about corruption.
Yes.
if the funds remained with the NHD, they would largely have been invested in government securities and sat on the balance sheet as lending capacity, waiting for projects that too often do not materialize. Not because the money is unavailable, but because, one, we do not have enterprise scale contractors in sufficient numbers. That's reality. Number two, we do not have large swathes of developable land that is close to where people want to live or where sufficient infrastructure exists, so that all that is required to do is to put in the last mile. This is why we are building new roads to open up new lands for housing. That is what we have done in the East, in St. Thomas and Portland, and now we're doing it in St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland. But even when we open up new lands through roads and highways, it takes time to get the infrastructure to the last mile. We have an over-bureaucratization of the development and approvals and permitting process. We are working to simplify and accelerate this, which is why you would have heard about FAST, about NARA. All of these are attempts to accelerate the process. Collectively, these factors mean that the cost of construction in the affordable segment of the housing market makes viable projects difficult to assemble. So the challenge, Madam Speaker, is not that the funds that we take from the NHD deprives the contributor of an opportunity to own a house. That's not accurate. The challenge is, because even though we have taken the funds, in this administration, we have done more than any other. To increase the size of the funds that contributors can access from the NHD. We have increased the number of persons who can co-make or co-join. But more than that, we have reduced the interest rate. Can you imagine you can get a mortgage for 0 interest rate? 0. Absolutely. Right? So in other words, what we have done, very high, 60% of the mortgages are 0%. No, 60% of the yes. So if you earn a certain level, you get a 0% interest rate. And 60% of mortgages pay actually 0% interest rate. So there's this notion that somehow the funds deprive. So the NHD, as I've said, offers 0% interest rates to low-income earners. But demand for mortgages is still limited because of the availability of homes in the price segment that the contributors would be able to afford. Now, this is an important point to note. Further subsidizing demand only ends up increasing prices. As we have increased the contributors' access to financing, what we see happening is an increase in the price of the house. In fact, every time we increase, the price of the house moves with the increases that we give in terms of the funds that they can access. And that tells you, more than anything, that there is a supply-side problem. That is really the issue. How do we expand the supply of houses? And we outline the structural issues that exist, which are not all NHD problems. So further subsidizing demand only ends up increasing prices. We have seen this clearly every time we have increased the NHD loan limit. Prices rise to absorb the additional lending capacity because supply does not keep pace. Jamaica's housing crisis is not a financing crisis. It is a supply crisis. And no amount of money sitting on the NHD's balance sheet will build a single new home without the land, the infrastructure, the approvals, the construction capacity to put it to work. What we need urgently and at scale is a ramping up of housing supply. And when we speak of supply at the scale Jamaica requires, we must think boldly. And that is why this administration developed the Greater Bernard Lodge Development Program as a demonstration of what becomes possible when government planners and the private sector align common vision around serious commitment and execution. I urge members who have not yet seen what is happening in Bernard Lodge to go and take a look at Bernard Lodge and see the housing that is going there. The next major large-scale master plan development will be the Greater Innswood development, and this NHT is tasked to lead the master planning of this development. Madam Speaker, I want to talk about some new measures to increase accessibility and affordability. While we work to increase housing supply, we are always working to ensure that homes we build are accessible to the Jamaicans who need them the most. I am pleased to announce that effective July 1, 2026, teachers, nurses, firefighters, and members of our security forces and defense forces will benefit from a specially reduced mortgage interest rate based on their length of service. For those with 5 to 10 years of service, the applicable interest rate will be reduced by 1%, and for those with service of 10 years or more, the rate will be reduced by 2%. For young Jamaicans under 35, the NHT will reserve a minimum of 20% of scheme units, doubling from the previous allocation of 10%, and will provide an advance of $2 million to assist with deposit requirements for open market purchases. Also effective July 1, the home improvement loan waiting period will be reduced from 7 to 5 years, giving existing homeowners faster access to funds for maintenance, security, green energy upgrades, and expansion. All of these were commitments made in our 2025 manifesto. Madam Speaker, in commemoration of the 50th anniversary, the NHD will break ground on 2 new state parks. I had already announced one in Manchester, and that is being developed as we speak. They are trying to come to some agreement with the local municipality as to the exact location as to where that should go. And the second, Madam Speaker, is in Kingston and St. Andrew. We have to build a park in Kingston and St. Andrew. We remember Emancipation Park. But, Madam Speaker,
that was low. That was low. That was low. That was low. That was low, and I'm becoming a captain. That was I'm becoming a captain.
Madam Speaker, we have started discussions. Madam Speaker, we have started discussions with His Excellency the Governor General on developing a park on sections of the King's House land. That park Madam Speaker, that park it will be particularly developed to deal with the needs of our seniors. A place where they can exercise and walk securely. So, So the NHTA, again, will have that responsibility. Madam Speaker, any serious conversation about land use, productivity, and housing must confront one of Jamaica's most visible failure in land utilization, our blighted urban spaces. Across parts of downtown Kingston, Spanish Town, and Montego Bay, vacant lots and derelict buildings occupy land that should be among the most economically productive. These sites sit close to infrastructure, jobs, and services. The potential is to unlock them. And what we will be doing, Madam Speaker, is to give the framework for unlocking these lands. Since 1995, the Urban Renewal Tax Relief Act has attempted to incentivize investments in such areas. But the results have been limited. Just 56 projects approved in 3 decades. Last year, I indicated that we would overhaul this framework to make it fully fit for purpose, and that work, led by the UDC with key stakeholders, is now well advanced. The new framework will strengthen the core incentive by allowing developers to apply the existing tax credit against up to 100% of income tax liability rather than the current 50%. Madam Speaker, this is a major change. For priority projects, including developments in severely blighted areas, affordable housing, and critical public facilities, the credit will increase from the current 33.33% to 40%. Unused tax credit will also become fully transferable, allowing them to move with the property when it is sold, a change that removes a major barrier to investment and supports the development and reinvestment model. The framework will also support the wider development ecosystem. Financing for approved projects will receive tax-exempt interest income for up to 8 years. Commercial tenants will be able to deduct 200% of rent, and first purchasers of homes in approved developments will receive a property tax exemption in their first year. So we are looking at a whole suite of incentives to attract investment into urban blighted communities. To address one of the most persistent obstacles, slow approvals, all permits, development approvals, and tax authorizations will be processed through a single digital portal managed by the UDC, dramatically reducing the processing time. Finally, the program will expand beyond downtown Kingston to include sections of central Kingston, Vineyard Town, Swallowfield, Olympic Gardens, Spanish Town, and Cape Manors in St. Catherine, Montego Bay in St. James, Port Antonio in Portland, and Morant Bay in St. Thomas. The new framework will also explicitly include disaster recovery and reconstruction areas, covering sections of Black River, Fonthill, Junction, and Santa Cruz in St. Elizabeth, White House, and Negril in Westmoreland and Hanover, and Falmouth in Trelawney. So, Madam Speaker, we are going, as they say, hard on attracting investment in urban blighted areas. Madam Speaker, some technical and legislative work remains, but we are targeting the first quarter of 2026-2027 for the new urban renewal framework to come into effect. Madam Speaker, we have a further incentive for redevelopment and relocation work that will be needed to be undertaken in the following parishes: Trelawney, Hanover, Westmoreland, and St. Elizabeth. For the next 2 years, transfer tax on properties in these parishes, Trelawney, Hanover, Westmoreland, and St. Elizabeth, will be reduced by 50%. The purpose of this is that in these parishes, this is where we will have the most need for relocation, which we will need to be able to sell property and dispose of property. Many persons want to come out of certain areas, and if we can incentivize this process, it would be in the interest of the restoration and recovery. And therefore, we have taken that decision to give a special transfer tax break in these areas. Madam Speaker, a vision of this scale demands not only clarity of ambition, but clarity of financing. And let me be direct about how Jamaica intends to pay for what I have described. We will not finance this resurgence through undisciplined borrowing that mortgages the future to pay for the present. Every element of the reconstruction and development program will be financed through a deliberately structured, multi-layered architecture that protects Jamaica's fiscal stability while mobilizing the full range of available resources. The financing rests on 4 distinct pillars: concessional sovereign lending. The core of the US $6.7 billion package secured from our multilateral partners is patient, affordable capital deployed for investment. It will finance the infrastructure backbone of reconstruction where private investment is not possible. So we will invest where public good is established. Private sector mobilization and PPPs. US $2.4 billion out of the US $6.7 billion package is specifically intended to crowd in private capital through public-private partnerships for projects where commercial returns can support private investments. The government provides the enabling condition, private capital provides the execution, scale, and commercial accountability. Climate and resilience financing. We will access dedicated climate financing mechanisms, including the Loss and Damage Fund under the UNFCCC, the Green Climate Fund, and other adaptation instruments to fund coastal protection, resilient infrastructure, and community relocation. Jamaica has paid a disproportionate price for the climate crisis, which it did not create. We intend to claim every dollar of climate finance we are entitled to. And 4, domestic long-term capital. We will mobilize Jamaica's own savings from pension funds and insurance companies. And this is what the recent reforms announced by the Minister of Finance are designed to do. We didn't just announce them in a vacuum. The recent changes in how pension funds and other long-term investment instruments can access and deploy their capital. We are not just hopeful, we are incentivizing them to deploy those capital resources into the projects that are going to be managed and executed under NARA and facilitated through the FAST program. So we have thought out an entire ecosystem of measures. Together, these pillars form a financing architecture that is prudent, diversified, and equal to the task before us. Madam Speaker, there are some critical enablers for this to be done. And I think, Madam Speaker, you will agree and permit me if I have a sip of water. By the way, how much was this one? How much was this one?
Yeah. This is all at $16.
This is less than $100.
This is $44.
This one is $44. Very nice, very nice. But I have another present for you. Send this over. Give it another one. We have one for you. This is NWC water. NWC water.
With the cost of the bottle, it is $16.
So this is about $20. Right? Of course. That was I brought it here. No, when I heard so when I heard
It's in your pipe.
when I heard the protestations of the leader of the opposition that water costs more than gas. I mean, so yes. If you bought Avion or some other, but that's not the question. The question is, why would the leader of the opposition go and buy water that costs more than gas when there are other options that are more economical? Madam Speaker, to me, it tells me that I wouldn't trust him with managing my economy. Madam Speaker, what I have described is a resurgent Jamaica, a new Jamaica. But all of this depends on a set of critical enabling conditions that must be in place and must be sustained. There are non-negotiable preconditions for the resurgent Jamaica I have described today to move from vision to reality. Enabler number one, maintaining debt sustainability and macroeconomic stability. You cannot buy water more expensive than gas. Madam Speaker, the first critical enabler is our ability to manage Jamaica's financing with the same discipline and intelligence that we have exhibited over the last decade. Within weeks of Melissa's landfall, the World Bank's rapid assessment estimated physical damage of $8.8 billion. When the full damage and loss assessment led by the Planning Institute of Jamaica was completed in March, capturing not just physical destruction, but direct and indirect economic losses, the figure emerged a huge, staggering $12.2 billion. That is 56.7% of Jamaica's GDP in 2024. Let us put that in full perspective. This is more than 4 times the losses from Hurricane Gilbert, which held for decades the grim distinction of being the most costly hurricane in our history. It is also larger than the FinSAC bailout, which cost the country 42% of GDP. The difference, of course, is that FinSAC was not an external shock, it was a PNP-created shock. It was a purely domestic homegrown crisis caused by poor policy choices of the PNP administration of the 1990s. It took us 30 years to get back the debt to GDP down to the same level as it was at FinSAC. 30 years. And this is the administration that brought it down. Madam Speaker, it is clear that by any measure, we are now dealing with an economic rupture of a scale this country has never confronted. The fiscal consequences strike from both directions at once. Tax revenues falling as economic activity contracts, while the demands on public expenditure surge for relief, for recovery, for restoration of public infrastructure. The central question is, how do we finance the deficit? The opposition has made some suggestions. The first is the introduction of electronic invoicing. This is something that has already been contemplated, but to get it to implementation, you have to first of all build out the digital infrastructure. Madam Speaker, it is a good recommendation. We're not naysaying it. That we were already contemplating it is neither here nor there. What I'm happy about is that it is the opposition that has brought it up. Because one of the reasons why we are very cautious in advancing it is that we know that once you put this out, even though you will hear people up front say, oh, this is a good move, you know that there are going to be issues raised about data security and privacy, issues to do with the digital infrastructure to carry it, because it is a very extensive system. So before you can even move such a system, you have to put in place something called public key infrastructure. You have to have they talk about today's world, you require data centers. You will need some very serious data centers, not just cloud data storage, but you have to have local data storage here. So there is a lot of work already being done to put us in a position to layer on this whole business of electronic invoicing. I'm therefore happy that we can say that there is consensus across the aisle that this is something that we must do. The Data Protection Act is already in place. All the work that we have done through NIDS and creating the ICT Authority, all of those come together to form what is necessary to build the system for electronic invoicing. The opposition's second suggestion is that we should just borrow a little more, literally. The budget does involve significant additional borrowing. But there is a fundamental difference between borrowing that builds and borrowing that burdens. The government is committed to ensuring that every dollar of additional debt is deployed as capital investment in infrastructure that increases our productivity, in systems that strengthen our resilience, in projects that grow the economy and generate the future earnings from which the debt can be repaid. Madam Speaker, the opposition spokesman also said that introducing new taxes at this time of economic downturn is pro-cyclical. That is, it tightens fiscal policy precisely when the economy needs room to breathe. That argument would have some validity if the government were using these tax measures to run a surplus, to extract more from the economy than we are putting back in. But that is not what is happening. Even with these additional tax revenues, we are projecting a fiscal deficit. This is why we have suspended the fiscal rules. This year, the government is planning to spend significantly more than it is collecting. So technically, Madam Speaker, we are putting more money into the economy. And when a government runs a deficit, it is by definition, or should be provide, depending on what it does with the funds, provide a net stimulus to the economy. It is injecting more into the circular flow of economic activity than it is withdrawing. That is not a pro-cyclical policy, it is counter-cyclical. Madam Speaker, I ask this House to pause and consider a sobering question. Where would Jamaica be today if we had listened to those who, during COVID, urged us to deplete our reserves, abandon our fiscal anchors, and spend without restraint? Where would we be standing now? Not only in the aftermath of the largest disaster in our nation's history, but also facing a fresh wave of global uncertainty driven by rising energy prices, supply chain disruption, and the conflict in the Middle East. Just imagine if we had arrived at this moment with empty buffers, exhausted credibility, and a debt burden already spiraling out of control. We would have had nothing left to give, no capacity to lend $150 million US to the JPS, no space to provide $10 billion in grants through the ROOFs program, no credibility to mobilize US $6.7 billion from our development partners. The light would still be off, there would be no water and Jamaica would be at the mercy of circumstances rather than in control of them. Madam Speaker, the public sector wage bill now poses a fiscal risk. Over the past 3 fiscal years, this government has undertaken a comprehensive restructuring of public sector wages and salaries. This reform was necessary and long overdue. Over the preceding decade, a gap between public and private sector compensation had grown to a point where the public service was struggling to attract and retain the talent needed to serve our citizens effectively. The restructuring was designed not only to reduce the gap, but to simplify the pay system and bring greater transparency to how public servants are compensated. The results have been significant. The vast majority of workers have received meaningful increases in their take-home pay. However, we must be clear about what this has meant for our public finances. As a result of the compensation reform, the wage bill has risen by approximately 3.7 percentage points of GDP, and now stands at around 13.8% of GDP in 2025-2026, coming from our target previously of 9%. Prior to this reform, public sector wages accounted for 36 cents of every dollar of tax revenue collected. Today, that figure stands at 49 cents. That is a profound shift in the structure of public expenditure, and it demands that we must be careful in how we press for further increases. Madam Speaker, this present juncture in our history requires a different approach to wage negotiations. The government, through consistent inflation targeting, has ensured price stability in the market. Inflation can no longer be the sole driving force for wage demands. Further increases must now be linked to productivity and GDP growth. Increases that are disconnected from productivity gains and GDP growth will not result in higher standard of living and higher wages. They will result in inflation, which erodes the very purchasing power those increases were meant to protect. I recognize that this represents a profound and maybe even controversial paradigm shift. If we are to preserve the macroeconomic stability that we have worked so hard collectively to build, and having demonstrated as a government that Labour will get its fair share as conditions allows, unions and the government must work together in reaching reasonable settlements. Madam Speaker, macroeconomic stability has anchored us through every storm, and the government will keep Jamaica firmly anchored. Madam Speaker, the other critical enabling factor is managing crime and violence. The number of murders recorded in Jamaica declined from 1,147 in 2024 to 673 in 2025, a 43% reduction in a single year. The first time in 31 years that Jamaica's murder toll has fallen below 700. And the momentum has not stopped. Between January 1 and March 14, murders have declined by a further 29.4% compared to the same period last year. So we are about what, 20?
22.
We are 22 as of yesterday? As of today. So we are 19 days, 22 murders.
1.1%.
So we are not doing too badly.
Too bad. We'll go below 500.
We will make it. We will make it below 500. This is clear evidence that sustained intelligence-led security operations and deliberate legislative and institutional strengthening are transforming our national security landscape. This progress has been facilitated by strategic use of emergency measures to give our security forces the time and space to develop their capabilities and at the same time attenuate growing problems. We can safely say, as it is visible for all Jamaicans to see, that we have increased the capabilities of our security forces, and they are now far superior to the capabilities of organized criminal elements in the society. The state must have the best intelligence, the best communication, the best transportation, and the best tactical equipment and weapons to eliminate and deter criminal threats. But we have also been ensuring that the state forces use these capabilities according to the law with respect for human rights, compassion for victims, and protection of the vulnerable. A critical component of this performance has been an all-out assault on gangs spearheaded by the Joint Anti-Gang Task Force. Gangs are the engine of Jamaica's violent crime. They control territory, they traffic narcotics, they extort communities, and they kill. Dismantling them is not a policing challenge, it is a national security imperative. Madam Speaker, in the coming financial year, the JDF will move forward with the establishment of Camp Warwicker, a forward operating base on approximately 100 acres of land at an estimated cost of $5 billion. The forward operating base will enhance the JDF territorial dominance of the Ligoni Plains through enhanced strategic communications and situational awareness. But it is also a resilience building measure, Madam Speaker, because as Newcastle becomes an aged camp, we have to find other strategic locations where we can house our defense force. And so Camp Warwicker is going to be yes, above you there, yes. So Camp Warwicker is going to become the new base and location for the JDF. Over time. Well, I mean, the leader of the opposition asked a question, are we giving up camp? I mean, you will always have a footprint in Upper Camp. It's not possible to totally demobilize. But we don't speak publicly about national security issues like that, but you always need the higher ground. You always need the higher ground. Madam Speaker, this budget deepens Jamaica's strategic transition from reactive crisis management to persistent readiness, from crime suppression to sustained reduction, and from fragmented border oversight to coherent domain awareness. It supports investments in layered surveillance, expanded radar coverage, UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle capacity, and persistent maritime domain awareness to ensure Jamaica never has to choose between disaster response and border security. Madam Speaker, gang-driven violence is only one dimension of the challenge. There is also the social violence that pervades daily life, domestic violence, child abuse, violence in schools and institutions. These are deeply embedded in our social fabric and will not be resolved by security operations alone. It is precisely this broader understanding that led this government to rename the Ministry of National Security as the Ministry of National Security and Peace, a deliberate signal that our mandate extends beyond crime suppression to active, sustained cultivation of peace in communities. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition in his presentation pointed to the moral, the breakdown of the moral fiber of the society. This is something I have also spoken to on numerous occasions. It is something that the government must address. Civil society must address. It is becoming a real threat to our civilization. The level of incivility, crassness, bad behavior, dysregulation, it is troubling. And it is not just a social issue, it is an economic issue. Because, if you have behavioral problems in schools, you will have behavioral problems in the workplace. And therefore, Madam Speaker, it is a problem that must be addressed. And so at some point, myself and the leader of the opposition will sit down to see how best there can be a joint approach to treating with this problem. Madam Speaker, for decades, Jamaicans have worked hard. Our people are resilient, entrepreneurial, and industrious. Yet too often, the rewards of that hard work have not been translated into rising incomes at the pace of citizens' expectations. The reason is not effort, not that people aren't working hard. Yes, people are working hard. The reason is that people are not working productively. There's a big difference. And let me be precise about the meaning of productivity, because this is one of those words that is often used but rarely understood. Productivity in its simplest form is the value produced per hour of work, not how hard you work, not how long you work, the value of what each hour produces. Madam Speaker, the International Labour Organization data shows that Jamaica produces approximately US $8.81 of output per hour work, adjusted for purchasing power. Let me be clear, Madam Speaker, this is not a judgment on Jamaican workers. It is a diagnosis of our economic structure. And I want the members of Parliament and those watching online to see it, that this is how Jamaica stacks up against the world and against the region. For the Caribbean, it is 21 US dollars per hour work. Jamaica, it is 8.81. Now, some persons may say, well, it's because you get a low wage why there is low output. The two things aren't always correlated, but there is an agreement that you have to increase wages to induce an incentive to work harder. So there is some merit to the argument that, our wages are too low. But there is still a problem as to why is it that the effort that we put out does not yield more productivity, more output. And a large part of it, I don't want to divert from my script too much, but some of it is social. We confuse service with servitude. A lot of it is behavioral, as we were speaking about. How we respond to authority, punctuality, sticking to task, having a kind of economistic mindset. Skills are a big part of it, which I'm going to go on to address. But, Madam Speaker, the graph now being displayed shows that Jamaica's GDP per hour work compared to the Caribbean and Latin America and the global middle income benchmarks at just $9 per hour. Jamaica is less than half of the Caribbean average of 20.5 US dollars per hour, as well as upper income countries in Latin America at US $21.10. And far below the high income Latin American and Caribbean countries, which produce nearly $40 per hour. And if you look at our labor productivity across selected Caribbean countries, you will see that, again, Jamaica is amongst the lowest. But I want you to pay attention to Panama and the Dominican Republic, because those are the countries and Trinidad and Tobago, that you would consider our peer groups that we would have to compete against. And that essentially tells you what our problem is. When we look at the graph now being displayed, which compares Jamaica with our Caribbean and regional peers, the picture becomes even clearer. Countries like Barbados, St. Lucia, Suriname, and the Dominican Republic cluster at between $22 to $26 per hour. Trinidad and Tobago exceeds that at $31 per hour. The Bahamas reaches $35 per hour, and Panama is at $43 per hour. Jamaica is at $8.81 per hour, sits near the bottom of the regional distribution, just above Haiti. We must address the problem of productivity. Madam Speaker, the government is developing a policy position on how to improve our low level of productivity, and I will come to this House at a later date to present this in detail. The issues of productivity is not just a matter of wages and remuneration, but also a matter of culture and socialization. Madam Speaker, every ambition and every goal in my presentation today, every road we build, every industry we grow, every technology we deploy, will ultimately be delivered by people. I have said it many times, and I say it again with the same conviction. Jamaica's greatest asset is our people, not our location, not our resources, not our brand, as powerful as it is. Our investment in people is central to our economic strategy. Madam Speaker, if we are serious about competing in a tech-driven, AI-enabled global economy, we cannot educate our children for a world that no longer exists. We must build the institutions that prepare them for the world of today, and more importantly, to compete globally in the world of tomorrow. I'm proud to announce that we will break ground this year on 2 of the 6 STEM schools that I had announced previously. The first will be established at Bernard Lodge in St. Catherine, and the second at Minard in St. Anne. Simultaneously, NARA will be building the other 4 STEM institutions that will take students from early childhood straight through to secondary education, immersing them in STEM from the earliest years right through to the door of our tertiary institution. These schools will bring an entirely new approach to the education system, exposing students to science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics in ways that build the creativity, innovation, and problem-solving skills that the economy of the future demands. Madam Speaker, my administration is a listening one, and we consulted our university students, leading to develop a work experience program that works for them. Starting in the upcoming financial year, the Hart NST Trust will introduce a pilot of the Tertiary Learning, Earning, and Prosper LEAP program to widen pathways from tertiary education to employment by providing paid on-the-job experience. Students of accredited tertiary institutions, as participants of the Tertiary LEAP program, will be able to engage in meaningful work in the public sector and participating private companies. As they work, they will receive a competitive part-time compensation package. LEAP is an opportunity for students to continue learning while Hart places them in employment of their choice so they can assimilate into the workplace, earning an income and garnering valuable experience. I must recognize the President of the University of the West Indies Guild of Students, Mr. Rashawn Winter, and the President of the University of Technology Students Union, Mr. Percival Roberts, and their teams for serving as the brains of this initiative. This is how my administration makes policy. We first listen to those who serve, then we act collaboratively. I thank these student leaders for putting pen to paper, bringing their ideas forward, leading every step of the way, and working with us to develop the program. Madam Speaker, the National Reconstruction Program under NARA will require thousands of skilled tradespeople, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, masons, roofers, and the capacity to train them at scale and at speed. Madam Speaker, the Hart Trust NSTA will train construction-related tradespersons who can assist in the Building and Resilience Initiative, as well as propelling the expansion of various sectors. Madam Speaker, we are launching a contractor incubator program, placing selected graduates from HART and UTech on a guided development pathway with access to technical assistance, advanced training, and concessional financing through the Development Bank of Jamaica to purchase equipment and scale their operations. The intent is to have Jamaicans gain experience on high-value public infrastructure projects and transition faster into sustainable employment and enterprise. Madam Speaker, I like this project because essentially what it is saying, it is an incubator for a new generation of contractors. Contractors are critical to the utilization of the capital budget. Madam Speaker, I was proud to bring the Heart Trust NSTA closer to Prime Minister Siaga's vision when we eliminated tuition fees up to level 4. Since then, Heart's doors have been open to more than 500,000 young and not so young men and women island-wide. Our mission to expand access to opportunity through skills training is not yet complete. I shall now complete that mission. In the coming financial year, tuitions for all Heart NSTA Trust programs up to level 5, note that this is a bachelor's degree, will be abolished for Jamaicans in the most challenging circumstances. Heart will become free from level 1 to 5 for those who need it most, because my administration understands how important it is to continuously improve access to skills training and give every Jamaican a clear pathway to prosperity. Madam Speaker, the most powerful classroom is the workplace, and the most effective instructor is experience. The apprenticeship model, learning by doing, earning while training, developing under the guidance of industry professionals, is one of the most proven pathways to skill development. Last year, I announced the CARE program, where each member of parliament could nominate young men and women who were not engaged in work, the proverbial youth on the corner. Through CARE, this administration provided training pathways while providing stipend and transportation support. Madam Speaker, a CARE graduate from the Gregory Park area is here with us today. Kimarley Ashley is in the gallery, and as a young trainee, Mr. Ashley joined the CARE program and was assigned to Collidilly Trading through the CARE program. He completed his level 2 certification in business administration with stipend support and transportation support. He gained valuable knowledge, employment skills, and real-world experience that has helped in his next steps. Mr. Ashby is now a full-time employee at Collidilly Trading. The recovery and reconstruction effort is not only rebuilding homes, it is rebuilding futures. Yes. Janie Freighter from Barton District in St. Elizabeth is with us today. He is one of the young Jamaicans participating in the Bridge program, building resilience and inspiring development through guided experience, learning modern construction techniques on the job, working alongside JDF teams and international engineering partners in our western parishes. His story is the story of what this program can do, turning work of recovery into the foundation of a career. Madam Speaker, this new on-the-job training approach to skills training has demonstrated results, and we are now mainstreaming these lessons in our HEART programs, especially in construction, manufacturing, and logistics through partnerships with the IDB. Madam Speaker, I'm particularly happy about this because we have asked the JDF and HART to partner together to ensure that while we are restoring the roofs, that we are training the young men and women, because we are going to need them during the reconstruction. This is what resurgence looks like in human terms. Jamaicans skilled, employed, earning, building. Jamaicans who no longer have to look beyond our shores to find a future worthy of their talent. Madam Speaker, I want to speak briefly about beach access. A planning issue which has been contentious for several decades is beach access. The leader of the opposition raised it in his presentation. Every administration has committed to creating a policy framework to improve and increase Jamaica's access to our beaches. Today I am tabling Jamaica's new beach access policy. The Beach Control Act of 1956 and its amendments in 1973 did not adequately address beach access issues and will have to be replaced, and the new policy is the first step in that direction. The policy focuses on developing a modern, inclusive definition of a beach and definition of the foreshore, backshore, and water shelf, outlining how the government will improve access, outlining the required legislative amendments, and outlining changes to the consideration for new development approval. Madam Speaker, another element of the policy is developing a framework around investments in man-made or constructed beaches. At the time of the 1956 Act, man-made beaches were not contemplated. It was, I mean, obviously man-made beaches have been around a long time, but it was contemplated as an endeavor in Jamaica. I think now we have to integrate that into a new framework of managing our beaches. So the policy, Madam Speaker, affirms government's commitment to ensuring that Jamaicans have access to their natural public assets in an orderly, safe, equitable, and sustainable way. Madam Speaker, we want to once and for all end any ambiguity, dispute, or any view that Jamaicans are being dispossessed and disconnected from accessing their beaches. Madam Speaker, last year, we signaled our intention to continue the journey from a minimum wage to a livable wage. And we indicated that the next step would be to increase the minimum wage to $18,500. However, in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, many of our businesses are rebuilding, many households are still recovering, and the economy is now navigating yet again another external shock in terms of energy prices and shipping costs. In this context, the government believes it is important to strike the right balance by continuing to improve earnings of workers while recognizing the realities employers face. We therefore propose a measured increase in the minimum wage from $16,000 to $17,000 effective July 1, 2026. This does not represent a departure from our long-term policy objective. The government remains committed to transition from a minimum wage to a livable wage, and as economic conditions stabilize, we will continue the phased increase necessary to realize that vision of the Jamaican worker. So, Madam Speaker, July 1, 2026, the minimum wage will move from $16,000 to $17,000. We continue to make the investment in lifting wage levels because ultimately we are going to have to address the productivity issue. Madam Speaker, we are not a nation that has had it easy. We are a people forged in the fire of history, shaped by struggle and suffering. We know in our bones, in our blood, in the memory carried across generations, what it is to be tested. Slavery could not break us. Colonialism could not diminish us. Poverty could not extinguish us. Debt could not define us. COVID could not stop us. Hurricane Gilbert could not silence us. And Hurricane Melissa, the most powerful storm this earth is capable of producing, could not and did not defeat us. Beyond any doubt, we have proven resilience as a nation. But resilience, Madam Speaker, is not our destination. Our test now is the harder one, the test of whether we have the vision to see in the rubble of what was the foundation of what can be. The test of whether we are bold enough, disciplined enough, and united enough to take everything we have endured and turn it into everything we deserve. To not merely survive, but to soar, to thrive, to move deliberately, decisively, and together from resilience to resurgence. Madam Speaker, I believe we are equal to that task. I know that we are equal to that test. I believe it because from the farmer I met in Westmoreland, standing in a field, stripped bare by Melissa, he is already talking about how he is going to prepare for his next harvest. I believe it because of the mother who cleared rubble with her hands so that her children would have somewhere to sleep, not waiting to be rescued, not surrendering to despair, simply doing what Jamaican mothers have done across every generation of our history. I believe it because the young entrepreneur who lost everything, but who is ready to start again. These are not exceptional Jamaicans, they are the typical Jamaicans. And that is the most powerful thing I can say about this country. Jamaica's greatness has never been in our size or our resources. It has always been in our people. The fastest humans on earth are ours. The most recognized music in the world is ours. The most resilient spirit in the world is ours. Madam Speaker, history will record that Melissa was the strongest storm to ever strike the island. But history will also record something else. That the Jamaican people, that the people of Jamaica were stronger than the storm of Melissa. We have proven that we can withstand. Now it is time to show the world that we can build. A Jamaica where every Jamaican in every parish, in every town, in every community on this beloved island can look at their country and say with pride and with certainty, this place was built for me and by me. And I was built for this place. That is the Jamaica we are building. Madam Speaker, this remarkable, irrepressible, godless island of our beloved Jamaica is rising. Resurgence is not a promise. Resurgence is not a promise we are making to Jamaica. It is our destiny, and we are claiming it together. May God be our refuge and guide in restoring what the storm took away. And may what we build in its place be greater in strength, richer in justice, more beautiful in spirit, and more Jamaican than anything that came before. Thank you. And may God today and every day continue to bless Jamaica. Land we love.